Gather round now, children of sorrow. Gather close under this weeping willow that's seen more blood than rainwater. I's an old soul, weathered like driftwood on the shore of memory, and my voice carries the weight of the middle passage chains still clinging to my bones. Listen here, folk. Tonight I speak of a woman they tried to break, tried to mark like cattle, tried to bury in shame and silence. Her name was Martha, and Lord have mercy. Her story burns hotter than the fires of hell itself. They poured acid on her face, thinking they'd destroyed her spirit. But oh, sweet Jesus, they only fed the flame that would consume 'em all. This here's the testimony of fire and vengeance, rebellion and resurrection. Hush now, hush your whispers. Let the ancestors speak through this old tongue. Now listen here, child. This tale begins in the year of our Lord 1852, down in the belly of Virginia, where the tobacco fields stretched long as suffering itself. The Harlan plantation sat heavy on that red clay earth, like a curse that wouldn't lift, with its big house white as bleached bones standing tall on the hill, looking down on the quarters where we lived like forgotten souls in purgatory. Old folks say that land carried heavy spirits from the day the first African touched them shores in chains, and I tell you true, them spirits never rested. Little Martha was born in them dark quarters on a night when the moon hid its face in shame. Her mama, Esther, was a field hand with hands calloused from picking tobacco till the blood mixed with the leaves. Strong-backed woman who could carry 2 full baskets when the overseer's whip cracked the air. Her daddy, Samuel, was a man of iron, blacksmith by trade, with shoulders broad enough to bear the weight of all our collective sorrow. In them days of deep sorrow, families held tight to whatever mercy God saw fit to grant, knowing full well the auction block waited hungry for any one of us. Martha grew tall and fierce from the start, even as a child of 7 summers. She had eyes like polished onyx that could pierce right through a white man's lies, and a spirit that wouldn't bend easy. Her mama taught her the old songs in whispers at night, African words that tasted like freedom on the tongue, syllables that carried the memory of a homeland none of us would ever see again. "Remember, child," Esther would say, voice low as prayer in the suffocating darkness of the quarters. "Remember where your people come from. We ain't just field hands and suffering creatures. We got kings and queens in our blood." The plantation itself was a world of cruelty disguised as order. Master Harlan, may his name be cursed to the 9th generation, ruled with an iron fist wrapped in gentleman's gloves. He was a man full of rage beneath that smooth southern talk, with a heart blacker than tar and meaner than a cottonmouth in August heat. His overseers, particularly one named Jessup, were devils in human form, men who took pleasure in other folks' pain like it was sweet whiskey. That whipping post in the center of the quarters stood tall as a gallows, split wood stained dark with the blood of countless backs. Lord have mercy. The work was endless. From can see to can't see, we toiled in them tobacco fields under a burning sun that showed no pity. Children no bigger than saplings worked alongside their mamas and daddies, tiny hands bleeding from the rough leaves, backs bent before they'd even grown straight. The overseer showed no mercy for weakness. If you fell, you got the whip. If you complained, you got the whip. If you even looked at him wrong, good God Almighty, you got the whip. But Martha, even young as she was, had defiance burning in her chest like hot coals. One evening after the work bell rang and the sun finally showed us mercy by setting, she snuck away from the quarters. The child was fascinated by words, you see, by the magic white folks kept locked away in them books. Her mama had taught her a few letters scraped from a torn Bible page, and that small taste of knowledge made her hungry for more. She crept up to the big house quiet as a field mouse, heart beating like African drums in her chest. Through the window, she could see the study where Master Harlan kept his books lined up like soldiers. The door was unlocked, foolish mistake on their part, thinking no slave would dare, and Martha slipped inside, her bare feet silent on the polished wood floors. The old ones warned us about the big house, said it was full of haunted spirits and white folks' evil. But curiosity drove that child forward. She grabbed the first book her small hands could reach, something with a leather cover that smelled of tobacco and privilege. Just as she turned to leave, quick as a runaway's flight, she heard boots on the stairs. Overseer Jessup appeared like a conjured demon, his face twisted with fury. "What in hell you doing here, girl?" he roared, voice loud enough to wake the dead buried in the slave cemetery. Martha froze, the book clutched to her chest like a shield. For one long moment, the world held its breath. Then Jessup's hand shot out, grabbing her by the arm with fingers that left bruises dark as thunderclouds. "Stealing from the master? You simple-minded little wench, I'll teach you your place." He dragged her outside, Martha kicking and scratching like a wild thing, her cries piercing the night air. The quarters came alive with fear and helpless rage as folks poured out to see what commotion was brewing. Esther screamed her daughter's name, but Samuel held her back, knowing that interfering would only make it worse. That's how bondage works, you see. It shows no mercy for weakness, and it turns parents into witnesses of their children's suffering. Jessup hauled Martha to the whipping post, that cursed tree that had drunk more tears than a river holds water. "Let this be a lesson to all you field niggers," he announced, voice carrying across the quarters like a preacher's sermon from hell. "This is what happens when you forget your place." He raised his arm, the whip unfurling like a serpent's tongue, black leather catching the moonlight. Martha's eyes met her mama's across the distance, and in that moment something passed between them. Not surrender, but a promise that this pain would be remembered, that this injustice would be tallied in a ledger kept by the ancestors themselves. The whip came down with a crack that split the night silence like thunder, and little Martha's scream echoed across the plantation, mingling with the cricket's song and the distant hoot of an owl. Blood stained her torn dress, dropping to soak into that cruel earth that had drunk so much of our suffering already. But here's the thing, folk. Even as that child stood there with her back on fire, even as tears carved rivers down her dust-covered face, her eyes never lowered. She stared straight ahead with a fury so pure it frightened even Jessup, though he'd never admit it. In the quiet of the quarters that night, after the white folks had retired to their comfortable beds, Esther held her daughter and whispered ancient words of protection, root work passed down from grandmothers who remembered Africa. "This mark on your back, baby girl," Esther murmured, voice thick with sorrow and iron determination, "ain't just a scar. It's proof you ain't broken. It's proof you got fight in you. Remember this pain, Martha. Remember it good, because one day, one blessed day, you're gonna make 'em pay for every drop of blood they took from us." And Martha, suffering something terrible though she was, whispered back with a voice beyond her years, "I remember, Mama. I remember everything." That night marked the birth of something dangerous in that child's soul. Not hate alone, but purpose. The kind of purpose that grows in darkness, feeding on injustice till it becomes a force that can't be stopped. The quarters fell into troubled sleep, but Martha lay awake, her back throbbing with each heartbeat, the stolen book hidden under her pallet of rags. She traced the letters with her fingertips in the dark, making a vow that would shake the very foundations of that cursed plantation. Outside, the wind carried whispers through the tobacco fields, and the old oak trees rustled like they knew what was coming. Even the hoot owl's cry sounded like a warning to the big house on the hill. But them white folks slept sound, never suspecting that the seed they'd planted with that whip would one day grow into a fire that would consume them all. And that's how it all started, people. With a child's defiance, a mother's whispered promises, and the bitter taste of blood on Virginia clay. The ancestors were watching, marking it all down in the ledger of cosmic justice. Martha's story had only just begun, and Lord have mercy on the souls who thought they could break her. Now you see, people, time moves different in bondage. Years pile up like cotton bales in the gin house, heavy and suffocating, each one marked by the seasons of planting and harvesting, of births and burials in that unmarked slave cemetery where the ancestors waited. Martha grew from that scarred child into a woman who stood taller than most men, with shoulders strong from years of toil and a spine that wouldn't bend despite all the cruelty them years had brought. By the summer of 1858, when Martha had seen 18 harvests, she'd become something of a legend in the quarters. The woman of steel, Folks called her in whispers, the one who never lowered her gaze, not for master, not for overseer, not for the devil himself. That old scar on her back from childhood had healed into a raised ridge that she wore like a badge, a reminder etched in flesh of the day she stopped being a helpless child and became a defiant one. Her mama Esther had passed 3 winters prior, worked to death in the merciless fields, coughing up blood till her lungs gave out. They buried her in the red clay earth with nothing but a wooden marker and a spiritual sung soft in the darkness. Martha stood at that graveside with eyes dry as bone, but them who knew her could see the fire burning hotter inside her chest. Her daddy Samuel had been sold off years before to some plantation down in the deep swamps of Georgia, vanished like smoke in the wind. One more family torn asunder at the cruel whim of white folks' commerce. The Harlan plantation had passed from old Master Harlan, who'd finally met his maker and whatever judgment awaited him, to his son, young Master Thomas Harlan, a man of 25 summers with his daddy's cruel streak but less of the old man's restraint. Thomas had grown up watching Martha from the windows of the big house, observing her in the fields as she worked, noticing the way other slaves seemed to gravitate toward her strength, how even the elders sought her counsel in the hush harbors where we gathered to pray in secret. Lord have mercy, the work never ceased. From first light when the rooster crowed to last light when exhaustion claimed us, we toiled in them tobacco fields that stretched to the horizon. The burning sun beat down merciless like God's own judgment, turning our skin darker still and drawing every drop of moisture from our bodies. The tobacco leaves grew tall, their broad green faces needing constant attention, topping, sucking, worming, cutting, hanging to cure in the dark barns where the air hung thick and sweet with the smell of drying leaves. Martha worked with an efficiency that bordered on defiance. She never hurried in panic like the younger ones, never moved with the broken shuffle of the crushed spirited. Instead, she moved with purpose, her hands swift and sure, her back straight as the whipping post itself. This drove the overseers mad with frustrated rage, 'cause they couldn't fault her work, couldn't find excuse to lash her, yet her very presence seemed to mock the institution that held us all captive. Overseer Jessup, still there after all them years, meaner and more wretched than ever, watched her with narrowed eyes full of suspicion and old grudges. That Martha, he'd mutter to the other drivers, tobacco juice dripping down his scraggly beard. She's trouble brewing. Mark my words, she needs taking down a peg or 3. But it wasn't just the overseer who watched Martha with intent. Young Master Thomas Harlan had developed what he called an interest in her, though everyone in the quarters knew what that meant. It meant danger of the worst kind, the kind that had destroyed countless women before her. In them days of deep sorrow, a slave woman's body wasn't her own. It belonged to the master, to be used and discarded as he saw fit, with no law to protect her, no court to hear her cries. One evening in late August, when the heat lay on the land like a suffocating blanket, and the cicadas sang their mournful song, Martha was working late in the tobacco barn, hanging the day's harvest to cure. The other workers had already trudged back to the quarters, but she'd volunteered to finish, pretending it was dedication to the work. Truth was, she valued them brief moments of solitude when she could let her guard down and breathe without the constant weight of surveillance. Master Thomas appeared in the barn doorway, his silhouette blocking the fading sunlight like an evil omen. "Martha," he called, his voice dripping with false friendliness. "Working hard as always, I see." She didn't respond, just kept hanging them leaves with steady hands, though her heart started beating like African drums in her chest. The old ones had warned her about moments like this, about being caught alone with white men whose power made him bold. Thomas walked closer, his boots crushing fallen leaves underfoot. "You know, Martha, you're quite remarkable. Stronger than most men, taller too, and those eyes of yours." He reached out as if to touch her face, and that's when she stepped back, putting a stack of tobacco between them. "I got work to finish, Master," she said, voice flat and hard as iron. "Sun'll be down soon." His face darkened with irritation at her withdrawal. "I wasn't dismissing you. In fact, I was thinking it's time we got better acquainted. You've been on this plantation your whole life, and I've been watching you grow into quite the woman." The silence in that barn grew heavy as chains. Martha's mind raced, calculating her options like a chess player seeing moves ahead. Submit and lose her soul, or resist and face consequences that could range from a whipping to being sold south to the cotton fields of Mississippi where they worked slaves to death in 3 years flat. "With respect, Master Thomas," she said carefully, each word measured like medicine, "I appreciate your interest, but I got no desire for such acquaintance. I'm just a field hand, simple-minded and suited only for work." She used their own words against him, playing the role they wanted to believe, the ignorant slave without thoughts or desires of her own. But her eyes, Lord have mercy, her eyes told a different story entirely. They blazed with intelligence and defiance, with a fire that no amount of degradation could extinguish. Thomas's face flushed red with anger and wounded pride. He wasn't accustomed to rejection from anyone, much less from a woman he considered his property. "You forget yourself, girl," he hissed, all pretense of gentility evaporating like morning dew. "I own you. I own every inch of you, from them strong hands to that defiant heart I see beating in your chest. What I want, I take." He lunged forward, grabbing her arm with fingers that dug into her flesh like iron claws. Martha reacted on pure instinct, twisting away and delivering a shove that sent him stumbling backward into a pile of tobacco leaves. For one frozen moment, they stared at each other, him shocked that a slave would dare lay hands on him, her equally shocked at what she'd done. You struck me?" Thomas sputtered, climbing to his feet with murder in his eyes. "You put your hands on your master?" Martha's heart sank like a stone in deep water. She'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, broken a rule that carried consequences more severe than death. But even as fear flooded her veins, that core of defiance in her chest burned bright. "You tried to force yourself on me," she said, voice steady despite the trembling in her limbs. "I defended myself. Even a slave got that right in the eyes of God." Thomas laughed to sound like shattered glass. "God? You think God cares about the rights of slaves? God made you to serve me, girl. And tomorrow you gonna learn that lesson permanent-like." He adjusted his clothes, his face settling into a mask of cold calculation. "Oh yes, Martha. Tomorrow, everyone on this plantation gonna see what happens to uppity nigger wenches who forget their place." He stalked out of the barn, leaving Martha standing there in the gathering darkness, her body shaken with the realization of what was coming. She'd seen punishments before, witnessed the brutal lessons Harlan taught to those who dared resist. Her mind flashed to the whipping post, to the branding iron, to worse fates whispered about in the quarters, slaves who disappeared after raising a hand to their masters, their bodies found days later in the woods, torn apart by dogs or hanging from trees as warnings. That night, Martha returned to the quarters with her heart heavy as lead. The other slaves could sense something wrong, could read the storm clouds gathering in her expression. Old Aunt Ruth, a root doctor and wise woman who'd seen 70 hard years, pulled Martha aside. "Child, what happened?" she asked, her gnarled hands gripping Martha's with surprising strength. Martha told her everything, words pouring out like water from a burst dam. Aunt Ruth listened in silence, her wrinkled face growing more troubled with each revelation. When Martha finished, the old woman closed her eyes and muttered prayers in a language older than English, words that tasted like Africa on the tongue. "You done stirred up a hornet's nest, girl," Aunt Ruth finally said. "That Harlan boy ain't gonna let this pass. He gonna make an example of you. Mark you permanent like to break your spirit and warn others." She paused, her cloudy eyes seeming to see beyond the present moment. "But listen here, whatever comes tomorrow, you hold on to your soul. They can mark the flesh, but the spirit, that's yours to keep." Martha spent that night sleepless on her pallet, listening to the quiet breathing of her fellow slaves, the occasional cry of a baby, the distant hoot of an owl that sounded like a morning song. She thought about her mama's words years ago, about remembering the pain and holding on to her fight. She thought about freedom, about the North Star she could see through the cracks in the roof, about all the souls who'd tried to reach it and failed. As dawn broke over the plantation, painting the sky the color of fresh blood, Martha rose with a strange calm settling over her. Whatever was coming, she'd face it standing tall. She'd face it with her eyes open and her back straight. And somewhere deep in her chest, beneath the fear and dread, a small flame flickered. Not of hope exactly, but of determination. A vow that if they were going to break her, she'd break something too. She'd make sure they remembered the day they tried to destroy Martha, that they'd remember it till their dying breaths. In the big house on the hill, Master Thomas Harlan whispered instructions to Overseer Jessup, his voice low and full of dark promise. "Aquela precisa aprender quem manda," he said, mixing his English with the Portuguese he'd learned from traders. "That one needs to learn who's in charge. Gather the hands. I want everyone to watch, and Jessup, make it memorable." The sun rose on Judgment Day, and the quarters held its collective breath. The ancestors watched from beyond the veil, marking down names and deeds in their ledger of cosmic justice. Martha walked toward her fate with her head high, unaware that her true story was only just beginning, that the fire inside her was about to be tested in ways she couldn't imagine. Now listen here, folk, 'cause what I'm about to tell you carries the weight of 1,000 souls suffering. That very same night, before dawn could break and reveal Master Thomas's promised punishment, something darker than midnight itself descended upon the Harlan plantation. The moon hid its face like it knew what evil was brewing, and the air hung thick with the smell of tobacco and approaching storm. Martha had barely closed her eyes when rough hands yanked her from her pallet. 3 white men, Overseer Jessup, and 2 paddy rollers from neighboring plantations, dragged her from the quarters while folks watched in helpless horror. "No use making this harder, girl," Jessup growled, his breath reeking of whiskey and cruelty. "Master wants a word with you for tomorrow's lesson." They hauled her across the yard toward the big barn where the tobacco hung drying, her bare feet scraping across dirt and gravel. Martha's heart beat like African drums, but she didn't scream, didn't beg. The old ones always said dignity was the one thing they couldn't whip out of you, and she held on to that truth like a drowning woman clutches driftwood. Inside the barn, Master Thomas waited, his face twisted with rage and something worse. Wounded pride mixed with lust gone sour. A single lantern cast shadows that danced like demons on the walls. "I gave you a chance to be willing," he said, voice cold as a January frost. "Could have been easy for you. But no, you had to fight, had to think yourself better than your station. Lord have mercy." What happened next in that barn is a story that still makes the ancestors weep. Thomas Harlan, filled with fury and evil intent, advanced on Martha while Jessup and the others held her arms. She fought like a wildcat, kicking and scratching, her screams piercing the night air. "You can take my body," she snarled through gritted teeth, "but you'll never break my spirit, you wretched soul." Her fingernails found Thomas's face, raking down his cheek and drawing blood in 4 parallel lines. He roared in pain and anger, stumbling backward. In that moment of confusion, Martha wrenched one arm free and delivered a blow to Jessup's jaw that sent him sprawling into a pile of tobacco. The other men grabbed her again, but not before she'd landed a solid kick to Thomas's groin that doubled him over, wheezing and cursing. "You damned witch!" Thomas gasped, his face purple with rage and pain. "You conjure woman from hell! I'll make you pay for this, make you wish you'd never been born." Through it all, Martha spat at his feet, a final act of defiance that sealed her fate. "I already wish that," she hissed, voice full of venom and tears she refused to shed. "Every slave on this cursed plantation wishes that. But if I'm gonna suffer, I'll make sure you remember my face every time you look in the mirror, massa. Them scratches gonna scar permanent like." The violence that followed was brutal and swift. The men beat her with fists and boots, each blow accompanied by curses and threats. But even as pain exploded through her body, even as blood filled her mouth and her ribs cracked under their assault, Martha's eyes blazed with unquenched fire. She refused to cry out again, refused to give them the satisfaction of her suffering. When they finally stopped, breathing heavy from exertion, Thomas stood over her broken form with murder in his eyes. "Tie her up," he commanded. "We ain't done yet." Tomorrow she gets the post and the whip in front of everyone. But tonight she learns what happens to nigger wenches who draw master's blood. They bound her to a post in the barn, rope cutting into her wrists till blood trickled down her arms. Thomas paced before her like a predator circling wounded prey, dabbing at the scratches on his face with a handkerchief that came away crimson. "You marked me," he said, voice shaken with barely controlled fury. "So I'm gonna mark you back, permanent-like. Gonna make sure everyone knows what you are, a rebellious beast that needs branding." But the branding iron wasn't what he reached for. Instead, he grabbed a clay jug from the corner, the kind they used for treating hides at the tannery, filled with caustic lye mixed with acids that could strip flesh from bone. Martha's eyes widened as she realized his intent, and for the first time that night, genuine terror pierced her defiant armor. "No," she whispered, the word escaping before she could stop it. "Don't, please." Thomas smiled, an expression devoid of humanity, twisted by generations of absolute power corrupting absolutely. "Now she begs," he sneered. "Now the high and mighty Martha shows fear. But it's too late for mercy, girl. You should have thought about consequences before you raised your hand to your master." He uncorked the jug, and the smell that wafted out was like death itself, acrid, chemical, wrong in every way. The other men shifted uncomfortably, even Jessup looking uncertain. "Master Thomas," Jessup ventured, "this might be taking it too far. She's valuable property, after all." "Silence," Thomas roared. "I'll do what I want with my property. She needs a lesson that'll last forever, that'll warn every other uppity slave on this plantation what happens when you forget your place." He approached Martha with the jug, and she thrashed against her bonds with renewed desperation, the rope cutting deeper into her already wounded wrists. "You gonna burn in hell for this," she screamed, voice cracking with terror and fury. "The ancestors are watching. God himself is marking down your sins in blood." "Your African gods got no power here," Thomas hissed, raising the jug. "And the white man's God made you to serve me." What happened next is etched in the collective memory of every soul who ever suffered bondage. Thomas Harlan poured that corrosive liquid directly onto Martha's face, and her scream, "Lord have mercy," her scream, split the night like the very fabric of heaven tearing apart. It echoed across the plantation, into the quarters where women clutched their children, and men clenched fists in impotent rage, into the fields where the tobacco plants seemed to shudder, into the very earth itself, which had drunk so much of our suffering. The acid burned like hellfire, bubbling and sizzling as it ate into her flesh. Martha's world became nothing but white-hot agony, worse than any whip, worse than any brand, worse than death itself would have been. Her skin blistered and melted, the left side of her face transforming into a twisted landscape of raw, weeping wounds. The men watched in horrified silence as she convulsed against the post, her screams fading into hoarse gasps, then into unconsciousness that was the body's only mercy. Thomas stepped back, the empty jug dangling from his hand, his face pale as he witnessed what he'd wrought. "Cut her down," he finally said, voice hollow. "Take her back to the quarters. Let her live with what she is now, a monster, a warning, a cautionary tale." They cut her bonds, and Martha's limp body crumpled to the floor like a discarded puppet. Jessup and another man carried her back through the pre-dawn darkness, her ruined face already swelling grotesquely. They dumped her outside the quarters like a sack of spoiled grain, and it was Aunt Ruth who found her first as the sun began to rise. "Sweet Jesus," the old woman cried, kneeling beside Martha's unconscious form. "Lord of glory, what have they done to this child?" The quarters erupted in chaos, women wailing, men cursing under their breath, children hiding their faces in their mother's skirts. They carried Martha inside and laid her on a pallet while Aunt Ruth called for water, herbs, anything that might ease the suffering. But everyone who looked upon her knew Martha's face would never be the same. They thought they had destroyed her, broken her completely, left her as nothing but a warning to others who might dare resist. But oh folk, how wrong they were. 'Cause even as Martha lay there unconscious, hovering between life and death, Something was growing in the charred ruins of her face. Not healing exactly, but transformation. The fire they'd tried to use to break her was instead forging her into something harder, something more dangerous than they could imagine. In the big house, Master Thomas Harlan washed the blood from his hands and stared at his scratched face in the mirror, unaware that he'd just created his own destruction. The ancestors were indeed watching, marking everything down, and the scales of justice, though slow, were already beginning to tip. And that's how it all started, people. The long, agonizing days that followed that night of horror. For 3 full days and nights, Martha lay in that dark cabin in the quarters, suspended between the living world and the realm of the ancestors. Her face, Lord have mercy. Her face had become a nightmare of blistered flesh and oozing wounds. The left side twisted into something that made even the strongest men turn away in pity and revulsion. Aunt Ruth tended her with herbs gathered from the forest at midnight, with prayers whispered in languages older than English, with poultices made from roots that carried the wisdom of Africa. The old conjure woman barely slept, applying cool cloth soaked in willow bark tea, spreading salves made from comfrey and plantain, chanting protective spells over Martha's fever-racked body. "Don't you dare die, child," she murmured, her gnarled hands gentle as butterfly wings despite their roughness. "Them devils want to break you, but you got to live. You got to survive to bear witness." The quarters held vigil in hushed whispers. Women brought what little food they could spare, cornmeal mush, bits of salt pork, wild greens, knowing that healing required strength. Men stood guard at night, watching for any sign that Master Harlan might come back to finish what he'd started. Children peeked through cracks in the walls, curious and terrified in equal measure, their young minds struggling to understand the depths of cruelty humans could inflict upon one another. On the morning of the 4th day, when the rooster crowed and the slave bell rang for work, something remarkable happened. Martha's eyes, both the unmarred right one and the damaged left one that had swollen nearly shut, fluttered open. The quarters had expected her to emerge broken, to retreat into the silent madness that sometimes claimed those who'd suffered too much. They expected tears, wails, surrender to the inevitable fate of a disfigured slave woman who'd never again be looked upon without horror. But when Martha's lips parted, the words that came out struck the gathered souls like lightning from a clear sky. Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper, each word obviously painful to speak through her damaged face. But the message was clear as spring water and sharp as a honed blade. "I will burn it all down." Aunt Ruth's eyes widened. The other women gasped. The men who'd lingered by the doorway exchanged glances heavy with meaning. Nobody dared ask what it meant. The plantation, the big house, the entire institution of bondage itself. Because in Martha's tone, in the furnace of her eyes, they heard something that made them both terrified and exhilarated. They heard not defeat, but declaration of war. "Child," Aunt Ruth whispered, pressing a cool cloth to Martha's forehead, "you need rest. You need healing. Don't speak such dangerous words when fever might still have hold of your mind." But Martha's hand shot out with surprising strength, gripping the old woman's wrist. "No fever," she said, each word deliberate and heavy with purpose. "My mind's never been clearer. They tried to mark me like cattle, tried to turn me into a monster to scare others into submission. Well, if I'm gonna be a monster in their eyes, I'll be the one they should have feared from the start." In the days that followed, as Martha's wounds slowly began the long process of scarring over, a transformation occurred that went deeper than flesh. The woman who'd been tall and defiant became something else entirely, a living symbol of resistance, a walking testament to survival against impossible odds. When Aunt Ruth finally unwrapped the bandages to examine the damage, they all saw what Martha had become. The left side of her face was a landscape of raised, twisted scars, ridges and valleys where smooth skin had once been. The eye still functional but surrounded by puckered tissue, her cheek marked with patterns that looked almost deliberate, like some ancient African scarification ritual gone wrong, or gone terribly right, depending on how you looked at it. The quarters fell silent as Martha studied her reflection in a bucket of water, and many expected her to weep at the sight of her destroyed beauty. Instead, she touched the scars with careful fingers, tracing the ridges like she was reading a map. "They thought this would destroy me," she said, voice stronger now, gaining power with each passing day. "Thought I'd hide in shame, broken and defeated. But these scars are my armor now. These scars are my war paint. Every time they look at me, they'll remember what they did, and they'll fear what's coming." Word of Martha's transformation spread through the slave network like wildfire through dry grass. Other plantations heard whispers of the woman who'd been burned but not broken, marked but not defeated. Some called her touched by spirits. Others said she'd made a deal with darker powers in her fever dreams. The truth, as old folks know, was simpler and more profound. Pain, when it doesn't kill you, sometimes forges you into something stronger than you were before. Master Thomas Harlan, hearing reports that Martha had survived and was recovering, felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. He'd meant to break her completely, to make her a cautionary tale that would keep other slaves in line through terror. Instead, he'd created something he didn't understand, something that made even hardened overseers nervous when they saw her moving through the fields once she returned to work. 'Cause Martha did return to work, much to everyone's surprise. The morning she walked out of the quarters for the first time since that night in the barn, the entire plantation seemed to hold its breath. She stood in the dawn light, her scarred face visible to all, and instead of shame or submission in her posture, there was defiance so pure it seemed to radiate from her like heat from a forge. Overseer Jessup, who'd been there that night, actually took a step back when their eyes met. "Get to work," he barked, but his voice lacked its usual venom. Something about the way Martha looked at him, not with fear or even hatred, but with cold calculation, made his blood run chill despite the morning heat. Martha went to the tobacco fields and worked with the same fierce efficiency as before, but now there was something different. The other slaves, who might have avoided her out of superstitious fear or pity, instead seemed drawn to her presence. During the brief moments when overseers weren't watching, they'd exchange glances with her. Brief nods, silent acknowledgments that something had shifted in the spiritual balance of the plantation. At night, in the hush harbors where slaves gathered in secret to pray and sing spirituals away from white folks' supervision, Martha became a different kind of leader. She didn't preach submission or patience, didn't speak of reward in the afterlife for suffering in this one. Instead, she spoke of justice, of resistance, of the ancestors who'd fought and died rather than accept chains. "They mark our backs with whips," she'd say, her scarred face illuminated by moonlight filtering through the trees. "They mark our faces with acid. They mark our souls with endless suffering. But we can mark them too. We can write our answer to their cruelty not in words they'd understand, but in actions they'll never forget." Old Aunt Ruth watched Martha with mixed feelings, pride at her strength, fear for what that strength might unleash. "Child," she said one night after the others had dispersed, "I see what's building in you like storm clouds on the horizon. But rebellion costs blood, and not just the masters. You ready to pay that price? To ask others to pay it?" Martha turned to face the old woman, her expression unreadable in the darkness, except for the burning intensity of her eyes. "Aunt Ruth, we're already paying the price every single day. Every child sold away from their mama, every back broken by the whip, every woman forced by her master, every man hanged for trying to be free. That's the price we're paying for their comfort, their wealth, their power. The question ain't whether we're ready to pay a price for resistance. The question is, how much longer are we gonna pay the price for submission?" The old woman had no answer, just pulled Martha close in an embrace that spoke of understanding, of love, of fear for what was coming. They both knew that Martha's scars had become more than physical wounds. They'd become a rallying symbol, a banner around which the oppressed might gather, a promise of retribution that whispered through the quarters like wind through tobacco leaves. 3 months after that night in the barn, Martha stood in the fields under the burning sun, her scarred face set in grim determination as she made a decision that would change everything. She would need allies, weapons, strategy. She would need courage beyond what any single person should be asked to possess. But most of all, she would need fire, literal and metaphorical, to burn away the institution that had burned her. And folks swear on their lives that the very tobacco plants seemed to lean toward her that day, as if the earth itself was conspiring with her plans, as if the ancestors were whispering approval from beyond the veil. Now you see, people, the path from suffering to resistance ain't straight, ain't easy, and ain't without its moments of doubt that can shake even the strongest soul. For weeks after Martha returned to the fields, she moved through her days like a woman possessed, not by demons, but by purpose so fierce it burned hotter than the acid that had marked her face. But at night, when the work was done and the quarters fell into uneasy sleep, Martha wrestled with visions that came unbidden, dreams that carried the weight of prophecy. In them fever dreams that still plagued her healing flesh, Martha saw things that made her cry out in languages she didn't know she spoke. African tongues passed down through blood memory, words her mama's mama might have whispered in the hold of a slave ship crossing the terrible Middle Passage. She saw faces of ancestors she'd never met, men and women with tribal marks and proud bearing, reaching out to her across the chasm of time and suffering. One night, sweating through her thin dress despite the autumn cool, Martha dreamed she was back on that ship, the one that had stolen her bloodline from African shores generations ago. She felt the chains cutting into ankle and wrist, heard the moans of hundreds packed so tight they couldn't even turn over, smelled the stench of death and despair. But in this vision, the ancestors spoke to her, their voices rising above the creaking of the ship and the crash of waves. "Daughter of the stolen ones," they intoned in unison. "You carry our rage in your veins, our resistance in your bones. The white man thought chains could break us, thought whips could tame us, thought they could burn away our dignity with acid and iron. But we persist, we endure, and through you we will have our reckoning." Martha woke with a gasp, her heart pounding like war drums. Aunt Ruth was beside her immediately, pressing a cool cloth to her forehead, murmuring soothing words. "The spirits are restless in you, child," the old woman said. "They're calling you to something, but you got to be careful. The path they're showing you is soaked in blood." "Aunt Ruth," Martha whispered, her scarred face glistening with sweat in the moonlight filtering through the cabin's cracks. "I can't live like this no more. I can't wake up every morning knowing I'm gonna spend another day making rich a man who tried to destroy me. I can't watch children being sold, women being used, men being broken. I just can't." The old conjure woman was quiet for a long moment, her weathered face carved with shadows and moonlight. Finally she spoke. "Then what you asking for, child? Tell Aunt Ruth true." Martha sat up, ignoring the pain that still lanced through her damaged face with certain movements. "I need to know about fire," she said, voice low but steady. "I need to know how to burn tobacco barns without the flames spreading too fast. I need to know which buildings hold what, who sleeps where, how the patty rollers patrol. And I need—" She paused, meeting the old woman's eyes. "I need to know about conjure that can give folks courage, make them willing to fight when everything in their bones tells them to submit." Aunt Ruth's eyes widened. "You talking about rebellion, girl. You talking about blood and death and consequences that'll rain down not just on you, but on every soul in these quarters. You talking about—" "I'm talking about freedom," Martha interrupted, her voice rising with passion despite the danger of being overheard. "Or at least about making them pay such a price for our bondage that they'll think twice before treating the next generation of slaves like we're less than human. Aunt Ruth, they already killed me in that barn. This body still breathes, this heart still beats, but the Martha who could accept her chains died when that acid touched my face. What's left is something new, something dangerous, something that needs to act before it consumes itself." The old woman studied her for a long time, reading in Martha's scarred features a determination that couldn't be reasoned with or prayed away. "You know what you're asking me to become? You're asking me to choose sides in a way that'll mark me just as permanent as that acid marked you." "I know," Martha said simply. "And I wouldn't ask if I had any other choice, if I thought I could do this alone. But I can't. I need wisdom, guidance, the kind of knowledge you carry. I need to know about goofer dust and crossing spells, about herbs that can steady nerves and roots that can give strength. I need every piece of the old knowledge that's been passed down from the motherland. Aunt Ruth closed her eyes, lips moving in silent prayer or calculation. When she opened them again, they held a resolve that matched Martha's own. All right, child, all right. But we do this careful like, methodical. Can't just run off half-planned and get everyone killed for nothing. If you're gonna make them pay, you gotta do it smart. From that night forward, Martha's healing became something more than physical recovery. Under Aunt Ruth's tutelage, she learned the secrets that had been preserved through generations of root work and conjure. She learned which herbs could calm fear and which could induce courage bordering on recklessness. She learned about gopher dust, that mixture of graveyard dirt, sulfur, and salt that could be used to cross someone, to lay a curse that would make them stumble and err. But more importantly, she learned patience. Aunt Ruth taught her that successful rebellion required more than righteous anger. It required careful planning, loyal allies, and timing that aligned with the movements of the moon and stars. The ancestors don't just give us rage, the old woman explained, grinding herbs in her mortar. They give us cunning, use both. During the day, Martha worked in the fields with apparent submission, her scarred face hidden partially by a head wrap. But her eyes were always watching, always calculating. She noted which overseers were cruel and which merely indifferent, which slaves might be trusted, and which were too broken or too loyal to the master to risk approaching. She memorized patrol patterns, guard rotations, the layout of every building on the plantation. At night, in the hush harbors, she began to carefully plant seeds of rebellion in receptive minds. Not direct talk of uprising. That would be too dangerous, too likely to reach the wrong ears. But questions that led people to their own conclusions. Don't you wonder what it'd be like to wake up free? She'd muse aloud. Don't you think the big house would burn bright as the sun if it caught fire? Innocent-sounding thoughts that carried deeper meanings for those ready to hear them. One evening, 2 months after her return to the fields, Martha approached a young boy named Samuel. Not her father, but named for him in honor, who worked in the stables. The child was maybe 12, quick and smart, with eyes that still held hope despite the horrors he'd witnessed. Samuel, Martha said quietly, you know how to be quiet-like, how to move without being noticed. The boy nodded, curious but wary. Yes'm, Miss Martha. I'm real good at not being seen when I want. Good, she said, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. I need you to do something for me, something important. But it's got to stay secret, even from your mama, you understand? Especially from your mama, 'cause what she doesn't know can't hurt her if things go wrong. Samuel's eyes widened, but he nodded again, sensing the gravity in Martha's scarred face and steady voice. What you need, Miss Martha? I need you to start counting, she said simply. Count how many white men sleep in the big house. Count when the paddy rollers ride out and when they come back. Count how many guns are in the armory, how much powder, how many shot. And I need you to tell me if you ever hear them talking about selling anyone off, about bringing in new overseers, about anything that might affect what happens on this plantation. Can you do that? The boy was quiet for a moment, processing the weight of what was being asked. Finally, he spoke in a whisper. This about what they done to your face, Miss Martha? This about getting even? Martha met his eyes, and in that moment she made a choice to be honest with this child who would be carrying part of her burden. It's about more than my face, Samuel. It's about every face that's been marked by their cruelty, every back that's been scarred by their whips, every family that's been torn apart by their greed. It's about making them understand that we're not animals to be broken, not property to be used and discarded. We're people, and people can only be pushed so far before they push back. Samuel stood straighter, his thin shoulders squaring with purpose. I'll do it, Miss Martha. I'll count everything and tell you true and... He hesitated, then plunged forward. If it comes to fighting, I can fight too. I'm small, but I'm fierce, my mama always says. Martha placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling the weight of what she was setting in motion. I know you are, child. I know you are. But for now, I just need your eyes and ears. The fighting will come soon enough, and Lord have mercy on all of us when it does." And that's how the first soldier in Martha's army was recruited, not with grand speeches or promises of glory, but with simple trust and shared purpose. In the big house, Master Thomas Harlan slept uneasily, his dreams haunted by a scarred face that seemed to follow him even into unconsciousness. The pieces were moving into position on a chessboard, neither side fully understood yet. Listen here, folk, because what I'm about to tell you is how revolution grows from whispers in the dark, how resistance blooms like nightshade in the shadows. 3 months after young Samuel started his counting and watching, Martha had gathered enough information to begin the dangerous work of recruiting her army. But oh, sweet Jesus, choosing who to trust with your life and the lives of everyone in the quarters. That's a burden heavier than any cotton sack, more dangerous than any overseer's whip. The first man Martha approached was Jonah, the plantation blacksmith. He was a powerful, strong man, built like an oak tree, with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of rebellion and hands that knew how to shape iron into tools or weapons. Jonah had his own scars, his own reasons for rage. 5 years prior, Master Harlan had sold his wife and 2 children to a cotton plantation in Mississippi, tearing his family apart for profit when gambling debts came calling. The man hadn't smiled since that day, working his forge with a fury that made even the overseers nervous. Martha waited until late evening when Jonah was banking his forge fire for the night. The orange glow painted his dark skin with flickering light as she approached, her scarred face half hidden by twilight shadows. "Jonah," she said quietly, "I need to speak with you about something that could get us both killed." The blacksmith's hand stilled on his tools. He looked at her with eyes that had seen too much suffering to be surprised by much anymore. "If it's about what I think it's about," he rumbled, voice deep as thunder, "then I've been waiting for someone to ask. These hands are tired of making horseshoes and mending plows. They're ready to make something else entirely." Over the next weeks, Martha carefully assembled her core group. There was Aunt Ruth, who brought spiritual power and knowledge of herbs that could heal or harm. There was Jonah, who could forge weapons in secret, who knew every tool and implement on the plantation. There was young Samuel, small but fierce, moving through spaces unseen, gathering intelligence with the dedication of a devoted spy. And then there was Isaiah, a field hand of 20 summers who'd tried to run for freedom twice before, been caught both times, and bore the scars of savage beatings on his back. Isaiah had a rebellious soul that couldn't be whipped into submission, and a hatred for Master Harlan that burned cold and calculating. "I'm done running," he told Martha when she approached him in the Hush Harbor one moonless night. "Next time I leave this plantation, it's going to be over their dead bodies or mine. No more middle ground." The last member of the inner circle was Dinah, the big house cook. At 40 years old, she'd spent half her life serving Master Harlan's family their meals while her own children went hungry. She was a woman of steel beneath her submissive mask, and she had access to the big house that no field hand could claim. "I've been poisoning their food slow for years," she confessed to Martha with a bitter smile. "Nothing that'd kill 'em, just enough to give 'em stomach troubles, make 'em suffer a little. But I'm ready to do more than that now. I'm ready to help burn it all down." They met in secret, these 5 conspirators, in the deep woods beyond the tobacco fields where the cypress trees grew thick, and Spanish moss hung like funeral shrouds. Aunt Ruth would lay down gopher dust in a circle around their meeting place, muttering prayers of protection that invoked ancestors and spirits to guard their words from unfriendly ears. They spoke in whispers even though no one could hear them, the weight of their plans demanding reverence and caution. "The barns are the key," Martha explained, using a stick to draw in the dirt. "We got 4 tobacco barns, each one full of dried leaves ready for market. That's Master Harlan's fortune right there, his whole year's profit. We burn those barns. We don't just hurt him. We cripple him, make him desperate, throw the plantation into chaos." Jonah leaned forward, studying her crude map. "And while they're fighting the fires, we strike the big house?" "Exactly," Martha confirmed. "Dinah will unlock the back door from inside. Isaiah and Samuel will have already disabled the bell they use to call for help from neighboring plantations. Aunt Ruth will have prepared smoke bombs using sulfur and herbs. Won't hurt nobody, but will add to the confusion. And she touched her scarred face. I'll be the one they see. I'll be their nightmare made real. Isaiah grinned, fierce and dangerous. When we talking about doing this? I'm ready right now. Patience, brother, Martha counseled, though her own blood sang with eagerness for action. We got one shot at this. We move too soon, we fail. We fail, we die, and worse, we doom everyone in the quarters to punishment for our actions. We need to wait for the right moment. That moment, they decided, would come during harvest time when the barns would be fullest, when extra slaves from neighboring plantations would be brought in to help, creating more confusion and potential allies. They would need to gather materials slowly, carefully, kerosene for the fires, weapons hidden in plain sight, escape routes mapped through the great dismal swamp that lay 20 miles north. But even as they planned, danger lurked closer than they knew. There was another slave on the Harlan plantation, a man named Silas, who served as a house servant and driver. Silas was what folks called a damaged soul, broken by years of being pitted against his own people, rewarded with small privileges for betraying his brothers and sisters. He'd overheard part of a conversation between Isaiah and Samuel, not enough to understand the full plot, but enough to make him suspicious and hungry for the reward Master Harlan would surely give for information about rebellion. One evening, Silas approached Martha while she was washing clothes in the creek. I hear things, he said, voice oily with false friendliness. I hear whispers about fires and fighting. Now I'm sure it's just talk, just angry words folks say when they're hurting. But if I was you, I'd be careful. Master's been nervous lately. Got the overseers watching extra close. Martha's blood ran cold, but her face remained calm as still water. Don't know what you're talking about, Silas. I just work my days and pray my nights like everyone else. Maybe you're hearing things that ain't there. Maybe that house wine you slipped from the master's stores is making your ears play tricks. Silas smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Maybe so, maybe so. But I'll be watching, Martha. I'll be listening. And if I hear anything concrete, anything that could get folks hurt, well, I got responsibilities to the master who feeds me. After he left, Martha stood in the creek with her heart pounding like war drums. That very night, she called an emergency meeting of her core group. We got a problem, she told them, voice tight with controlled fear. Silas suspects something. He don't know details yet, but he's watching. We need to either bring him in or... She paused, the weight of what she was suggesting hanging heavy in the air. Or silence him permanent, Jonah finished, his face grim. That's what you're saying. The group fell silent, each wrestling with the moral weight of that decision. They were planning rebellion, yes, but premeditated murder of another slave. That was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Yet if Silas betrayed them, everyone would die anyway, probably tortured first to reveal other conspirators. Let me talk to him, Aunt Ruth finally said. Let me see if I can bring him around, make him understand what we're fighting for. Silas is broken, but maybe not beyond healing. Give me 3 days. Martha nodded, though doubt gnawed at her. 3 days, Aunt Ruth. But if he don't come around, if he's still a threat... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. As they dispersed back to the quarters, each carrying the weight of their dangerous knowledge, none of them noticed the shadow that detached itself from a distant tree, a shadow that had been watching, listening, putting pieces together. The traitor among them wasn't Silas at all. It was someone else, someone closer, someone who would soon face a choice between loyalty to their people and fear of the consequences of rebellion. The moon hung heavy and red in the sky that night, what old folks call a blood moon, an omen of violence to come. The ancestors whispered warnings on the wind, but whether anyone was listening remained to be seen. Now listen here, children of sorrow, because what I'm about to tell you is how plans become real, how whispered dreams transform into calculated action. The next 2 weeks saw Martha and her conspirators moving like chess pieces on a board only they could see. each one playing their role with the precision of folks who understood that one mistake meant death, and not quick death neither, but the kind that came slow and public, meant to break the spirit of anyone who might dare follow their example. Young Samuel proved himself worth his weight in gold. The boy moved through the plantation like a ghost, counting and memorizing everything Master Harlan owned. 4 tobacco barns, he reported to Martha one night, his young voice pitched low. The biggest one, the one closest to the big house, that's where they store the prime leaf, the stuff going to Richmond and beyond. That barn alone worth more than 20 slaves at auction. Martha nodded, filing away the information. And the kerosene? Overseer Jessup keeps 5 barrels in the tool shed, uses it for the lanterns and cleaning equipment. But Miss Martha. Samuel hesitated, his eyes troubled. There's something else. Master Harlan done sent word to Richmond. He's planning to sell 10 of us, including my uncle Tobias and Isaiah's younger brother Marcus. The auction's set for 3 weeks from now. Rage flooded through Martha like fire through dry brush, but she kept her voice steady. 3 weeks, that changes everything. We move before the auction, or we lose 2 of our strongest men and break more families apart. She looked at Samuel with fierce pride. You done good, boy. Real good. Now I need you to do something even more dangerous. I need you to get me the key to that tool shed just for one night. The boy's eyes widened, but he nodded. I can do that. Jessup gets drunk most nights, sleeps heavy. I can slip the key ring from his belt and put it back before morning. The ancestors are watching over you, child, Martha said, touching his head in blessing. You got their protection, but you also got to be careful. One mistake and we all pay. Over the next days, Martha worked on perfecting the plan with Jonah at the forge. The blacksmith had been secretly crafting tools that could double as weapons. Heavy iron bars that looked like equipment for tobacco processing, but could crack skulls just as easy. Sharp farming implements with edges honed to deadly precision. I've been waiting my whole life for this, Jonah rumbled, his scarred hands steady as he worked the metal. Every blow of this hammer is for my wife, for my children I'll never see again. This ain't just rebellion, Martha. This is prayer made physical. Dinah, the cook, had her own role to play. She'd been mapping the big house from inside, noting which rooms held what, where Master Harlan slept, where the guns were kept, which windows stuck and which opened smooth. The master's got 6 rifles and 4 pistols in the study, she reported, her voice bitter as chicory coffee. Keeps 'em locked up, but I seen where he hides the key, under a loose floorboard beneath his desk. And there's more. He's been drinking heavy lately. Gets himself worked up with whiskey and guilt about what he'd done to your face, Martha. His wife heard him crying one night, saying he went too far. But his daddy's ghost won't let him show mercy, keeps pushing him to be harder, crueler. Good, Martha said coldly. Let him suffer with guilt. Won't save him when the time comes, but maybe it'll slow him down, make him hesitate when he needs to act fast. Aunt Ruth had been working her own kind of magic, preparing what she called courage roots, a mixture of valerian, ginseng, and other herbs that would steady nerves and sharpen focus. She also prepared something darker, a potion designed to be slipped into the big house's evening meal on the night of the rebellion. Not enough to kill, but enough to make the white folks sluggish, confused. Their reactions slowed when seconds would matter most. This here's powerful conjure, the old woman warned, showing Martha the various pouches and bottles she'd prepared. But it ain't foolproof. You still gonna need courage that comes from the heart, not from roots. These herbs just help you access what's already inside you. The strength of the ancestors, the rage of the oppressed, the will to be free at any cost. But even as the plan took shape, complications arose like weeds in a garden. 3 days after Aunt Ruth had promised to approach Silas, the suspicious house servant, she returned with troubling news. He ain't gonna join us, she reported, her old face drawn with worry. But he also ain't gonna betray us, not directly anyway. He's too scared to do either. He's just gonna keep his head down and pretend he don't know nothing. But that kind of cowardice is dangerous too. If the master pressures him, offers him freedom or money, he might talk. "Then we need to move faster," Isaiah urged, his rebellious soul chafing at delay. "Every day we wait is another day something can go wrong." Martha shook her head. "No. We stick to the plan. We move during harvest when the barns are full and there's maximum confusion. But we also need insurance against Silas talking." She turned to Jonah. "Can you arrange an accident? Something that would keep him laid up but not dead. Not obviously done on purpose?" The blacksmith nodded grimly. "A forge is a dangerous place. Accidents happen. I can make sure he gets burned bad enough to be out of commission for weeks, laid up in the quarters where we can watch him close." It was ugly work, planning to hurt one of their own, but survival demanded hard choices. 2 days later, Silas suffered a mishap at the forge. His left hand badly burned when he allegedly stumbled into hot metal. The injury was severe enough to require Aunt Ruth's constant care, which meant he was effectively under guard, unable to move freely or communicate with the big house. With that threat neutralized, at least temporarily, Martha turned her attention to the final details. Young Samuel successfully borrowed Jessup's keys one night, allowing Martha and Jonah to quietly relocate 2 barrels of kerosene from the tool shed to hidden locations near each tobacco barn. They worked in darkness, moving like shadows, their hearts pounding with each sound that might signal discovery. Martha also began testing her own limits, her own capacity for what was coming. Late one night, she stood before the largest tobacco barn with a small bottle of kerosene in her hand, imagining the moment when she'd pour it out and strike the match. The power and terror of that moment washed over her, the knowledge that once that fire was lit, there would be no going back, no mercy, no forgiveness from either God or man. "You having second thoughts?" came Aunt Ruth's voice from behind her. Martha turned, her scarred face set in grim determination illuminated by moonlight. "No second thoughts. Just measuring the weight of what I'm about to do. Innocent people might die in what's coming. Children might be caught in crossfire. The quarters might suffer punishment for our actions. That weight sits heavy on my soul." "It should sit heavy," Aunt Ruth agreed. "The day it don't. The day you can burn and kill without feeling the weight. That's the day you become just like them." "But Martha, sometimes the cost of freedom is blood. Sometimes the only way to stop greater evil is to commit lesser evil. The ancestors understand that. They've been watching white folks commit evil for centuries without conscience. At least you're struggling with it, which means your soul's still intact." As Martha returned to the quarters that night, passing the whipping post that stood as a monument to suffering, she made her final peace with what was coming. Master Thomas Harlan had announced the auction date officially. 15 days hence, 10 souls would be sold. Families torn apart, futures destroyed for profit. That gave her 15 days to prepare, to gather her courage, to make sure every detail was perfect. But what Martha didn't know, what none of them knew despite their careful planning and surveillance, was that another player had entered the game. A new overseer had been hired, a man named Carlyle who'd built his reputation on crushing slave rebellions before they could start. He was arriving in 3 days, and Master Harlan had specifically brought him to the plantation because of rumors, whispers, a growing sense that something was brewing among the slaves. The clock was ticking faster than Martha realized. The fire was coming, yes, but so was discovery. And when those two forces met, the explosion would reshape the Harlan plantation forever. And folks swear on their lives they could feel it in the air. That electric tension before a storm breaks when lightning is gathering but hasn't struck yet. When the very earth seems to hold its breath waiting for the thunder. Sweet Jesus, what I'm about to tell you now is how pressure builds till something's got to break, how tension coils like a snake ready to strike. The new overseer, Carlyle, arrived on a Tuesday morning that carried the weight of bad omens. Crows gathering in unusual numbers, a stillborn calf in the barn, and a blood-red sunrise that old folks whispered meant violence was coming. This man was different from the others, and everyone in the quarters could sense it the moment he stepped off his horse. Carlyle was lean and hard as whipcord, with eyes that missed nothing and a reputation that preceded him like the smell of sulfur. Word on the slave network was that he'd put down 3 rebellions on different plantations, using methods so brutal that even other overseers whispered about them in horror. He didn't just punish instigators. He broke entire communities, made examples so terrible that the mere memory of them kept folks in line for years afterward. Master Thomas Harlan walked him through the plantation with obvious pride, showing off his property, both land and human. "I've had concerns lately," Harlan was saying, loud enough for nearby slaves to hear, obviously intentionally. A sense of unrest, particularly among the field hands. "I want you to assess the situation, identify potential troublemakers, and take whatever measures necessary to maintain order." Carlyle's cold gaze swept across the tobacco fields, lingering on each slave with the calculating attention of a man reading a book. When his eyes landed on Martha, working with her back straight and her scarred face partially visible beneath her head wrap, he stopped. "That one," he said, pointing. "Tell me about her." Martha felt her blood turn to ice as Master Harlan recounted her story, the defiance, the punishment, the survival. "I tried to break her," Harlan admitted, something like regret or maybe fear in his voice. "Marked her face with acid. Should have destroyed her spirit completely. But if anything, it made her more defiant, more dangerous. The other slaves look to her now, though I can't prove any wrongdoing beyond hard stares." Carlyle studied Martha with the intensity of a hunter who spotted his prey. "That's because you're looking for overt rebellion," he said. "But the most dangerous ones are the ones who plan in silence, who wait and watch. That woman there, she's got rebellion written in every line of her body and the way she holds herself. I've seen it before. She's either leading something or about to." He turned to Harlan. "Give me 3 days to investigate. I'll know everything that's happening in these quarters by week's end." That night, Martha called an emergency meeting in the deep woods, and for the first time, real fear showed on all their faces. "We got a problem bigger than Silas," she told the group. "This new overseer Carlyle, he's not like the others. He's hunting us specifically, and he's got the skills to find what he's looking for. Maybe we should call it off," one of the newer recruits suggested, a woman named Ruth's sister whose courage was flagging under the pressure. "Wait till this Carlyle moves on to another plantation." "No!" Isaiah practically snarled. "The auction's in 12 days. My brother gets sold in 12 days. We can't wait. We won't get another chance like this." Jonah the blacksmith leaned forward, his massive hands clenched into fists. "Isaiah's right. We've been planning this for months. We got the kerosene placed, the weapons ready, the routes mapped. We move now or we lose our moment. Maybe Carlyle being here is actually perfect. He'll be so busy investigating that he won't see the fire till it's already burning." But Aunt Ruth, the wise woman, shook her head with worry creasing her weathered face. "Or maybe the ancestors are sending us a warning through this man's arrival. Maybe we're rushing toward destruction instead of liberation. I've been getting dark omens in my root work, seeing shadows in the smoke that trouble my spirit." Martha listened to them argue, feeling the weight of leadership pressing down on her scarred shoulders. Every voice had merit, every concern was valid, but in her heart she knew they'd passed the point of no return. They'd moved pieces into position, taken risks that couldn't be undone. Stopping now wouldn't make them safe. It would just leave them exposed and vulnerable, waiting to be discovered. "We move in 4 days," she announced, her voice cutting through the debate with finality. "Not 12 days, not at the planned time, but 4 days from now, this Saturday night. We can't give Carlyle time to investigate. We hit fast, before he knows what he's dealing with." The group fell silent, absorbing this acceleration of the timeline. 4 days meant less preparation, more risk, but also less opportunity for discovery. It was a gambler's move, betting everything on speed over perfection. "What about the harvest timing?" Dinah asked. "We was gonna wait till the barns was fullest to do maximum damage." 3 of the 4 barns are already full enough," Martha replied. "We'll hit what's there. The important thing is striking before Carlyle unravels our plan. Agreed?" Slowly, reluctantly, they nodded, all except Aunt Ruth, whose eyes held a sorrow that spoke of foreknowledge. "Blood's coming," she whispered. "Rivers of it." I just pray we're on the right side when it's all done. The next 3 days passed with agonizing tension. Carlyle prowled the plantation like a hunting dog on a scent, questioning slaves individually, watching work patterns, studying interactions with an intensity that made everyone nervous. He focused particularly on Martha, often positioning himself where he could observe her, taking notes in a small leather journal he carried. On Thursday, 2 days before the planned uprising, disaster nearly struck. Carlyle discovered one of the hidden kerosene barrels near the second tobacco barn. Martha's heart stopped when young Samuel brought her the news, his face pale with terror. "He found it, Miss Martha. Overseer Carlyle found the barrel we hid. He's showing it to Master Harlan right now, asking who moved it there." But fortune, or perhaps the ancestors, intervened. Jessup, the regular overseer, stepped forward and claimed responsibility, not out of loyalty to the slaves, but to protect his own reputation. "That's where I told them to store extras," he lied, not wanting to admit he'd been so drunk and careless that slaves had been able to steal from under his nose. For the lamps and cleaning, thought it was smart to distribute supplies around the plantation. Carlyle didn't look convinced, but without proof of Jessup's incompetence or slave conspiracy, he let it pass, though his suspicions clearly deepened. That evening, he requested that Master Harlan double the patrols and keep the slave quarters under watch through the night. "Something's brewing," he insisted. "I can feel it. We need to be ready." On Friday, the day before the uprising, an unexpected complication arose that nearly broke Martha's resolve. A severe thunderstorm rolled in from the west, bringing torrential rain that turned the plantation into a sea of mud. Rain meant wet wood, harder to ignite. Rain meant visibility problems, treacherous footing. Rain might mean calling off the entire plan. Martha stood at the entrance to her cabin, watching water pour from the sky, feeling like the universe itself was conspiring against them. Aunt Ruth came to stand beside her. "Rain is cleansing," the old woman said softly, "but it's also cold and unforgiving. What we do tomorrow, we do with clear eyes, knowing the cost. No turning back, no mercy asked or given. You still sure about this, child?" Martha touched her scarred face, feeling the ridges and valleys where smooth skin had once been, remembering the agony of that acid burning into her flesh, remembering every indignity, every cruelty, every family torn apart that she'd witnessed in her 23 years of bondage. "I'm sure, Aunt Ruth. Rain or shine, fire or flood, tomorrow night the Harlan plantation burns, and with it, the illusion that we're property to be used and discarded. We're people, and people fight back." That night, the conspirators made their final preparations in whispered conversations and furtive movements. Weapons were distributed and hidden, knives in boots, hammers tucked under clothes, pitchforks positioned near the tobacco barns for legitimate work reasons. Dinah prepared the herbs that would go into the big house's Saturday dinner, measured carefully to sicken but not kill, to slow reactions but not obviously poison. Martha visited each conspirator individually, looking them in the eyes, making sure their courage held. She found doubt in some faces, determination in others, fear in most. But she also found something else: hope. The kind of desperate, fierce hope that comes when you've got nothing left to lose, when even death seems preferable to continued bondage. Young Samuel was the last she visited, finding the boy in the stables, ostensibly tending horses but actually shaking with a mixture of terror and excitement. "Miss Martha," he whispered, "I'm scared. What if it all goes wrong? What if we get caught?" She knelt before him, placing her scarred hands on his thin shoulders. "Then we die free, Samuel. We die knowing we fought, that we didn't go gentle into that good night, that we burned bright even if only for a moment. Your grandchildren's grandchildren will tell stories about tomorrow night. We'll speak your name with pride. That's worth being scared for, don't you think?" The boy nodded, tears streaming down his face, but his jaw set with determination. "I'll do my part, Miss Martha. I promise. I'll make the ancestors proud." As Saturday dawned, the rain stopped, leaving everything damp but not soaked. The timing was imperfect but workable. The sky cleared to reveal a sunset of impossible beauty, oranges and purples and reds painting the horizon, like the heavens themselves were blessing the coming fire. Martha stood watching that sunset, knowing it might be the last one she ever saw, and felt a strange peace settle over her scarred heart. Tonight, the Harlan plantation would learn that you can burn a woman's face, but you cannot burn out her fire. Tonight, the slaves would rise. Tonight, the accounts would come due. And the ancestors gathered thick as fog, their spirits pressing close to witness what was about to unfold, their voices whispering encouragement and warning in equal measure. The stage was set, the players in position. All that remained was the striking of the match. Lord have mercy. What I'm about to tell you now is how the world catches fire, how whispered dreams become roaring reality. Saturday night descended upon the Harlan plantation like a shroud, the darkness thick and heavy with moisture from yesterday's rain. The moon hung thin as a sickle in the sky, offering just enough light to see by, but not enough to expose movements in shadow. Perfect conditions for what was coming, as if the heavens themselves were conspiring with the oppressed. Martha stood at the edge of the quarters, her scarred face composed in grim determination, watching the big house where lamplight flickered in windows like evil eyes. Inside, Master Thomas Harlan and his family were finishing their Saturday supper, the food laced with Dinah's carefully prepared herbs. Within the hour, they'd be sluggish, confused, their bodies betraying them at the crucial moment. Everything was in position. Every player knew their role. The only thing left was the spark. "It's time," Martha whispered to Jonah, who stood beside her like a monument of muscle and barely contained rage. The blacksmith nodded, his jaw set hard as the iron he worked. Behind them, 15 slaves, the bravest, the most desperate, the ones with nothing left to lose, waited in tense silence. Isaiah gripped a pitchfork with white knuckles. Young Samuel clutched a hammer bigger than seemed reasonable for his small frame. Aunt Ruth muttered prayers in African tongues, invoking ancestors and spirits to guide their hands and guard their souls. The plan was simple in concept, terrifyingly complex in execution. Martha would strike the first barn alone, drawing attention and initial response. While the white folks scrambled to fight that fire, the others would hit the remaining 3 barns simultaneously, creating chaos too widespread to contain. In the confusion, they'd storm the big house, seize weapons, and either kill or capture Master Harlan and his overseers. After that was in the hands of God and the ancestors. Martha moved through the darkness like a spirit herself, crossing the muddy expanse between quarters and tobacco barns with practiced silence. She carried a clay jug filled with kerosene and a bundle of rags soaked in the same flammable liquid. Her heart hammered against her ribs like it was trying to escape her chest, but her hands remained steady. Years of suffering had burned away her fear, leaving only purpose refined to its purest essence. The first barn loomed before her, massive and full of dried tobacco leaves that represented Master Harlan's fortune. Months of slave labor hung in neat rows inside, ready to be sold and shipped north and across the ocean. Each leaf was watered with sweat, blood, and tears of the enslaved. Tonight, all that suffering would transform into something else entirely, into flame, into justice, into a message that would echo across Virginia and beyond. Martha circled the barn, splashing kerosene against the wooden walls in patterns that would ensure maximum spread. The smell was overwhelming, chemical and wrong, but also intoxicating in its promise of destruction. She worked methodically, remembering Jonah's instructions about fire patterns, about wind direction, about how flames like to climb and spread. When the jug was empty, she stood at the barn's main entrance and pulled out the lucifer matches she'd stolen from the big house weeks ago. Her scarred hand trembled slightly as she struck the first match, not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of what this moment represented. Once this flame touched that kerosene, there would be no going back. Lives would be lost, the world would change, history would pivot on this single action. The match flared to life, and for one frozen instant, Martha saw her reflection in a nearby water barrel, her scarred face illuminated by the tiny flame. her eyes burning brighter than the match itself. She thought of her mother, worked to death in these very fields. She thought of her father, sold away and lost forever. She thought of every child ripped from its mother's arms, every back scarred by whips, every woman violated, every man broken. She thought of the acid burning her face and Master Harlan's cruel laughter. "This is for all of us," she whispered, and dropped the match onto the kerosene-soaked rags. The fire took hold with a hungry roar that sounded almost alive, flames racing up the barn wall like eager fingers reaching for the sky. The dry tobacco inside ignited within seconds, creating an inferno so bright and hot that Martha had to shield her face and step back. The crackling roar was beautiful and terrible, a symphony of destruction that sang of liberation and revenge in equal measure. For a moment, Martha stood transfixed by the flames, watching orange and red and white dance against the night sky. The heat washed over her in waves, and she understood why ancient peoples had worshipped fire as a god. It was cleansing and consuming, creative and destructive, capable of both warming a home and burning down empires. Then the shouting started. From the big house, from the overseer's quarters, from the slave patrols, voices raised in alarm and confusion. "Fire! Fire! The tobacco barn's ablaze!" The plantation bell began ringing frantically, its clang, clang, clang cutting through the night like a scream. Martha pulled the hood of her cloak up, partially concealing her face, and melted back into the shadows. She watched as white men poured from buildings, some half-dressed, all panicked. Master Harlan emerged from the big house, stumbling slightly. Dinah's herbs were working, bellowing orders that men scrambled to obey. Slaves were roused from the quarters and driven toward the fire with buckets, forming a chaotic water line that was utterly inadequate against the inferno. "Get water! Form lines! Save what you can!" Overseer Jessup was screaming, his face illuminated by the firelight looking like a demon from hell itself. But then, just as the bucket brigade was organizing, just as hope flickered that maybe they could contain this disaster to one barn, 3 more fires erupted simultaneously across the plantation. Jonah at the 2nd barn, Isaiah at the 3rd, 2 other conspirators at the 4th. The night exploded with flame, 4 massive pillars of fire reaching toward heaven like the fingers of an angry god. The white folks' panic transformed into terror. "It's everywhere. They're all burning. This ain't no accident. This is sabotage." Carlisle, the new overseer, was the first to understand the truth, his hunter's instincts screaming warning. His eyes scanned the crowd of slaves supposedly fighting fires, looking for the ones who weren't panicked enough, who moved with too much purpose. His gaze locked onto Martha, who'd positioned herself near the well where she could observe everything. Even with her hood up, even in the chaotic firelight, he recognized her by her height, her bearing, the way she stood while others cowered. "You," he roared, pointing, "the scarred woman. This is your doing." Martha threw back her hood, revealing her ruined face in all its terrible glory, lit from behind by 4 burning barns. She smiled, an expression made even more frightening by her scars, and her voice rang out clear and strong over the crackling flames and panicked shouting. "Yes, this is my doing. This is the doing of every slave you've ever beaten, every family you've torn apart, every soul you've crushed beneath your boot. You wanted to mark me? You wanted to make me a monster? Well, monsters burn, Master Carlisle, and tonight everything burns." Around her, other slaves stopped pretending to fight the fires. Hands that had been carrying water buckets suddenly held weapons instead. The uprising that had been simmering beneath the surface for months erupted into open rebellion, and the Harlan plantation learned what happens when you push human beings too far, when you mistake silence for consent and submission for acceptance. The real battle was just beginning, and the night had only started burning. And folks swear on their lives that in that moment, with 4 barns blazing and Martha's scarred face illuminated by righteous fire, they saw the ancestors themselves standing behind her, countless souls stretching back across the middle passage, across centuries of bondage, all of them nodding approval as their daughter finally struck back. Now listen here, folk, because what I'm about to tell you is how the oppressed rise up like a flood that's been dammed too long. how centuries of rage break loose in one terrible night of reckoning. The moment Martha revealed herself, the moment she proclaimed the burning as her doing, the plantation erupted into violence that had been building for generations. This wasn't just about one woman's scarred face. This was about every indignity, every cruelty, every stolen life crying out for justice. Isaiah was the first to strike, his pitchfork finding Overseer Jessup's shoulder before the white man could draw his pistol. The overseer went down screaming, blood mixing with mud, and his cries seemed to trigger something primal in the other slaves. Tools became weapons. Bucket carriers became warriors. The facade of submission shattered like glass, revealing the fury that had always simmered beneath. "To the big house!" Martha roared, her voice carrying over the chaos of crackling flames and panicked shouting. "Take the weapons! Take the master! This ends tonight!" She led the charge across the muddy yard, her scarred face a mask of determination in the firelight. 20 slaves rushing behind her like an avenging tide. Master Thomas Harlan, seeing the rebellion advancing on his home, tried to rally his men. "Shoot them! Shoot the devils!" But Dinah's herbs had done their work too well. His hands shook, his vision swam, and when he raised his rifle, the shot went wide. His own body betrayed him at the crucial moment. Cosmic justice delivered through poisoned supper. Carlisle, the dangerous new overseer, proved harder to overcome. He'd avoided the drugged meal, his suspicious nature keeping him cautious. And now he fought with the skill of a man who'd put down rebellions before. His pistol barked twice, and 2 slaves fell, one dead before hitting the ground, another wounded and crawling. "This is what comes of mercy," he snarled, reloading with practiced speed. "This is what comes of letting them think they're human." But Jonah the blacksmith had other ideas. The massive man came at Carlisle like a force of nature, his hammer swinging with deadly intent. The overseer fired again, the bullet tearing through Jonah's shoulder, but the blacksmith didn't slow. Years of rage, years of loss, years of his children's faces haunting his dreams. All of it channeled into one devastating blow that connected with Carlisle's skull with a crack that echoed even over the burning barns. The overseer crumpled, and whether dead or merely unconscious, nobody stopped to check. The slaves poured into the big house like water through a broken dam, smashing through doors that had always been locked to them, charging upstairs they'd never been permitted to climb. The master's wife screamed from an upstairs window, and their children cried in terror as the world they'd always known, the world where they were untouchable, superior, safe, came crashing down around them. Martha found Master Thomas Harlan in his study, trying desperately to load a rifle with hands that wouldn't cooperate. He looked up as she entered, and for the first time in his life, she saw pure fear in his eyes, the kind of fear slaves lived with every single day. "Martha," he gasped, "please, I'm sorry about your face. I was drunk. I wasn't thinking straight. We can work this out. I can free you, give you papers." She advanced on him slowly, savoring his terror the way he'd savored her pain. "You think this is about my face?" she asked, her voice cold as January frost. "You think this is personal revenge? No, Master Harlan. This is about every back you've scarred, every family you've torn apart, every soul you've treated as property. My face is just the catalyst. The fire's been building for 300 years. Behind her, Isaiah and 2 other men dragged Harlan from his desk, binding his hands with the same rope he'd used to tie slaves to the whipping post. His wife and children were similarly secured, pulled from their bedrooms and herded downstairs with rough hands that showed no mercy. The same lack of mercy they'd shown to countless slave families over the years. Outside, the battle continued. Some slaves had broken into the armory, seizing rifles and pistols, while others fought with whatever tools they could find. A few white overseers tried to mount a defense, barricading themselves in the barn that wasn't burning, firing out at the rebels. But they were outnumbered and overwhelmed, and one by one their positions fell. Young Samuel, small but fierce as his promise, fought beside men 3 times his size. He'd taken up a fallen overseer's whip, the very symbol of their oppression, and used it to disarm another white man, the leather cord wrapping around the enemy's gun hand with surprising precision. "This is for my uncle being sold," the boy screamed, his young voice cracking with emotion. "This is for my mama who died in the fields." But victory came at terrible cost. The rebels were taking casualties too, slaves shot or beaten as they charged, bodies falling in the mud, blood mixing with rainwater. A woman named Sarah, who joined the uprising hoping to prevent her daughter from being sold, took a bullet to the chest and died with her child's name on her lips. An old man called Prophet, who'd preached freedom in the hush harbors, fell to an overseer's club and didn't rise again. Aunt Ruth moved among the wounded like a spirit herself, applying bandages torn from fancy curtains stolen from the big house, using her root knowledge to ease pain and stop bleeding where she could. "The ancestors are welcoming our fallen," she intoned, tears streaming down her weathered face. "But oh, the price we're paying tonight. Lord of glory, the price is steep." The turning point came when Jonah, wounded but unbroken, managed to break into the gunroom despite Master Harlan's locks. He emerged with an armful of rifles that he distributed to the rebels, evening the odds dramatically. Now armed properly, the slaves pushed forward with renewed ferocity, overwhelming the last pockets of white resistance. Within 2 hours of Martha lighting that first fire, the Harlan plantation had fallen completely to slave control. Master Harlan and his family were prisoners. The overseers were dead, captured, or fled into the night. The big house stood occupied by those who'd built it, but never been permitted to enter it as anything other than servants. And the 4 tobacco barns burned down to ash and ember, destroying the master's fortune in flame and smoke. Martha stood on the big house's front porch surveying the scene with mixed emotions. They'd won. Impossibly, miraculously they'd won. But at what cost? She counted 12 rebel bodies laid out in a row, 12 souls who'd paid the ultimate price for this night's freedom. And she knew this was only the beginning. Militias from neighboring plantations would come. The state would send soldiers. They'd hunt down every rebel and make examples so terrible that the memory would haunt generations. Isaiah climbed the steps to stand beside her, his face streaked with blood and soot. "What now, Martha? We got the master, we got his house, we got his weapons. But we both know reinforcements are coming. We got maybe till dawn, maybe less." Martha looked at him, then at the gathered rebels. Exhausted, wounded, exhilarated, terrified. Some were already talking about fleeing north toward the Underground Railroad. Others wanted to stay and defend what they'd taken. Still others advocated for killing the master and his family, eliminating any chance of mercy later. Before Martha could answer, young Samuel came running from the direction of the road, his face pale with fear. "Miss Martha, riders coming. I seen torches in the distance, lots of them. The neighboring plantations know something's wrong. They're coming with guns and dogs." The rebels fell silent, the reality of their situation crashing down like a weight. They'd won the battle, but the war was just beginning. And this war, they all knew, was one they couldn't win. Not with violence alone. Not against the entire machinery of slavery backed by law and power and centuries of systematic oppression. Martha looked at the burning barns, at the liberated big house, at her fellow rebels bloodied but unbowed. She thought about the great dismal swamp 20 miles north where Maroons lived free in the wilderness. She thought about the Underground Railroad and Harriet Tubman leading people to freedom. She thought about the choice before them: die fighting here or live fighting somewhere else. "Gather everyone," she commanded, her voice steady despite the impossible decision before her. "Gather everyone who can walk. We got a choice to make, and we got to make it fast. The fire's spread, but we ain't done burning yet." And that's how it all started, people. The moment when victory and defeat danced so close together they were almost indistinguishable. When slaves learned they could win, but also discovered the terrible price of winning. The night was far from over, and the hardest choices still lay ahead. Sweet Jesus, what I'm about to tell you now is how triumph turns to desperate siege. How victory's celebration gets cut short by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. The torches young Samuel had spotted in the distance were closing fast. A militia from 3 neighboring plantations, maybe 40 armed white men on horseback, alerted by the fire's glow against the night sky, and the frantic messenger who'd escaped during the initial chaos. Martha stood on the big house porch, her strategic mind racing through options that all looked equally grim. "How long till they get here?" she demanded of Samuel, who was still catching his breath from his sprint. 10 minutes, maybe less," the boy gasped. "They're riding hard, Miss Martha. Got dogs with them too. I could hear the barking." The rebels gathered in the yard below, their faces illuminated by the dying fires of the tobacco barns. Understood what this meant. Running now would mean being hunted through darkness by men who knew this land, by dogs trained to tear flesh from bone, by a system that had centuries of practice catching runaways. But staying meant siege, meant fighting an enemy with superior numbers and weapons, meant probable death for everyone. "We fortify," Martha decided, her voice cutting through the rising panic. "We got the big house. We got weapons. We got the master and his family as hostages. We make them pay for every inch they take. Isaiah, Jonah, get every man who can shoot to the windows. Aunt Ruth, take the children and wounded to the cellar. Dinah, you know this house. Show me every entrance, every window, every way they might come at us." The next few minutes were frantic preparation. Rebels hauled furniture to barricade doors and windows, positioned themselves at strategic points throughout the big house, loaded rifles with trembling hands. Master Harlan and his family were dragged to the front parlor, bound to chairs where they could be seen from outside. Human shields, bargaining chips, symbols of the world turned upside down. "You're all going to die," Harlan wheezed, Dinah's drugs still making him sluggish but not unconscious enough to miss the gravity of the situation. "You think you can fight the whole South? You think this ends anyway but with your bodies hanging from trees?" Martha grabbed his face roughly, forcing him to look at her scarred features. "Maybe so," she hissed, "but you're dying with us, Master. And before we go, we're taking as many of your kind as we can. That's the new deal. Slavery ain't free no more. Every slave you own might be the one who burns your house down. How much is your cotton worth now? How valuable is tobacco when the people who grow it might kill you in your sleep?" Outside, the militia arrived with thundering hooves and shouted orders. Their leader, a man named Colonel Whitmore from the neighboring Ashford plantation, sat high on his horse surveying the scene. The burned barns, the occupied big house, the clear signs of successful rebellion. His face twisted with rage and disbelief. A slave uprising was every white Southerner's nightmare, the thing they'd constructed their entire society to prevent. "You in the house," Whitmore bellowed, his voice trained to command. "This is Colonel James Whitmore of the Virginia militia. You are in unlawful rebellion. Release your hostages and surrender immediately, and we promise swift justice rather than prolonged suffering." Martha appeared at an upstairs window, her scarred face visible in the firelight, a rifle in her hands. "Swift justice?" she called back, her voice dripping with bitter laughter. "Like the swift justice Master Harlan gave me when he burned my face with acid? Like the swift justice given to every slave sold away from their families? We know what your justice looks like, Colonel. We've been living under it our whole lives." "Who speaks?" Whitmore demanded. "Identify yourself, woman." "My name is Martha," she declared, and her voice carried across the yard with the weight of prophecy. "Martha, daughter of stolen Africans, survivor of the Middle Passage's legacy, marked by acid but not broken. And I'm speaking for every slave who ever dreamed of freedom, who ever resisted, who ever died trying to be human in a system that called them property." Murmurs rippled through the militia. Some looked disturbed by her words, others enraged. Whitmore's face purpled with fury. "You have one chance to surrender. Release Master Harlan and his family unharmed, and we'll consider mercy." "We got a counteroffer," Martha shouted back. "You let us leave, all of us, with supplies and horses for the swamp. We release the hostages unharmed. You try to stop us, and Master Harlan dies first. Then his wife, then his children. Then we burn this house with us inside it. You want to explain to Virginia society how you let a master and his family die because you wouldn't let slaves walk away free?" It was an audacious demand, one that struck at the heart of slavery's contradictions. If they agreed, they'd set a precedent that rebellious slaves could negotiate freedom. But if they refused, they'd sacrifice one of their own class to maintain the principle that slaves must never win. The militiamen exchanged uncertain glances, the usual certainty of their superiority wavering in the face of determined resistance. Whitmore conferred with his lieutenants in hushed, urgent tones. Finally, he called back, "Your terms are unacceptable. You will surrender or we will take that house by force. You have 10 minutes to decide." Inside the big house, the rebels knew what that meant. Attack was coming, and it would be brutal. Martha gathered her core group in the hallway. "They're not letting us walk away," she said, though everyone already knew it. "So we got two choices. Fight here and die, or make a run for it under cover of darkness, and maybe some of us survive." "I say we fight," Isaiah declared, his rebellious soul burning bright. "We came this far, we spilled blood already. Let's make it count. Let's make them remember this night for generations." But Aunt Ruth, her old eyes red with tears and wisdom, shook her head. "Death for death's sake ain't victory, child. Some of us got to survive to tell the story, to carry the message forward. Martha, you especially, you got to live. Your scarred face needs to become legend, needs to inspire others. You die here tonight, you become just another dead rebel. You escape, you become symbol of what's possible." Before Martha could respond, the attack began. Not with warning, not with honor, but with sudden violence. Militiamen charging from multiple directions, some on foot, some still mounted, all firing indiscriminately at the big house. Windows exploded inward as bullets found glass. Wood splintered as rifle balls tore through walls. The rebels fired back, and the night exploded into the kind of chaos where death comes random and swift. A young woman named Rebecca, who'd been watching the back entrance, took a bullet through the throat and died choking on her own blood. A man called Big Moses returned fire and dropped 2 militia riders before a shotgun blast caught him in the chest. Bodies fell on both sides, the price of rebellion measured in blood and screaming. Jonah fought like a man possessed, his blacksmith's strength allowing him to wield a heavy rifle like a club when ammunition ran low. He crushed skulls and broke bones, his face a mask of fury as he thought of his wife and children lost forever to slavery's appetite. But even his mighty strength had limits. A bullet found his side, then another caught his leg, and the massive man finally fell like a great tree under the axe. "Jonah!" Martha screamed, but she couldn't reach him through the chaos. The blacksmith looked at her one final time, blood staining his teeth as he smiled. "Burn it all, Martha," he gasped. "Burn it all." Then his eyes closed, and another hero of the rebellion passed into legend. The fighting intensified, both sides committed now beyond any chance of negotiation. The militia set fire to the back of the big house, thinking to smoke the rebels out, but this only gave the slaves inside more weapon. Now they could use the spreading flames for cover, could position themselves behind smoke and fire, could turn the master's own house into a defensive fortress of ash and ember. Through it all, Martha fought with the fury of someone who'd already died in that barn when acid burned her face, who was living on borrowed time anyway, who had nothing left to lose but her dignity and her cause. Her rifle barked again and again. Each shot a prayer, each hit a hymn of liberation. And around her, slaves who'd never imagined they could stand against white power discovered their own terrible strength, their own capacity for resistance, their own willingness to die free rather than live in chains. And folks swear on their lives that in that moment of siege and fire, with bullets flying and blood flowing, they heard singing, spirituals rising from the rebels' throats even as they fought. "Swing low, sweet chariot, and wade in the water," songs of freedom and crossing over. Songs that had always carried double meanings. Songs that now became battle hymns for a war that had been building since the first African touched American shores in chains. Now listen here, folk, 'cause what I'm about to tell you is how victory tastes like ashes in the mouth, how triumph comes wrapped in sorrow so heavy it crushes the soul. The battle raged for 3 more hours, the big house transforming into a hellscape of smoke and blood, of desperate resistance against impossible odds. Bodies piled up on both sides, militiamen and rebels alike, the price of this night's reckoning measured in lives that would never see another dawn. Martha crouched behind an overturned dining table, her rifle empty, her scarred face streaked with soot and blood, not all her own. Around her, the remaining rebels fought with the ferocity of cornered animals. But she could see the truth in their exhausted faces. They were losing. Not because they lacked courage, not because their cause was unjust, but because arithmetic doesn't care about righteousness. 40 armed militiamen against 20 exhausted slaves. The math was brutal and unforgiving. Isaiah appeared beside her, his shirt soaked with blood from a shoulder wound. "Martha," he gasped, voice raw from smoke inhalation. "We can't hold much longer. The back wall's burning through. Another 10 minutes and this whole house comes down with us inside it." She looked at him, this fierce young man who'd tried twice to run for freedom and been caught both times, who'd joined her rebellion knowing it was likely suicide, but choosing it anyway because living in chains was its own kind of death. "Your brother Marcus," she said. "He's still alive, still in the cellar with the others." "Last I checked, yeah. Aunt Ruth got him, and about 8 others down there, including 4 children." "But Martha," Isaiah's voice cracked, "we're about to get them killed. We're about to get everyone killed for a rebellion that lasted one night. Was it worth it?" Before Martha could answer, a section of the ceiling collapsed nearby, sending sparks and burning timber crashing down. The heat was becoming unbearable, the smoke choking thick. Through a broken window, she could see Colonel Whitmore repositioning his men, preparing for a final assault that would overwhelm the rebels' last positions. "Gather everyone who can move," Martha commanded, her mind racing through impossible calculations. "Bring them to the front parlor where we got the hostages. I got one more card to play, one more gambit before we all burn." In the parlor, Master Thomas Harlan sat bound to his chair, his face pale with fear and fury as flames licked at walls around him. His wife sobbed quietly, their children clinging to her despite their own bindings. They'd watched their world burn tonight, watched their assumed superiority revealed as nothing more than force backed by law, and now they faced the very real possibility of dying in the house their slaves had built. Martha dragged the master's chair to the window, making sure the militia outside could see him clearly. "Colonel Whitmore," she shouted, her voice hoarse but carrying, "you want your master back alive. You want his family to survive this night. Then you listen good to what I'm about to say." The shooting paused. Whitmore rode closer, his face suspicious but listening. "What are your terms, rebel?" "No terms," Martha replied, and her words carried a weight that made even hardened militiamen uncomfortable. "Just truth, just testimony, just witness to what we done here tonight and why. You gonna kill us? I know that. We all know that. But before we die, before you write your version of this story in your newspapers and your histories, I want the ancestors to hear our version. I want heaven itself to know why we burned these barns and took this house." She paused, gathering breath that tasted of smoke and blood. Behind her, the surviving rebels assembled, battered, wounded, exhausted, but standing tall. Aunt Ruth held young Samuel, both their faces etched with resignation and pride. Isaiah leaned against a wall, bleeding but unbowed. Dinah the cook, who'd poisoned the master's supper, stood with her head high despite the burns on her arms. "My name is Martha," she declared, her scarred face illuminated by the burning house behind her. "Before tonight, I was property. Before tonight, I was a field hand worth maybe $800 at auction. But I was also a daughter of Africa, stolen from my homeland generations back. I was also a woman with dreams and hopes and a soul that cried out for freedom. And when Master Harlan burned my face with acid because I refused his advances, something in me died, and something else was born." Her voice rose, gaining strength from some deep well of defiance that suffering hadn't dried up. "We burned his tobacco, because that tobacco was watered with our sweat and blood. We took his house because we built it with our hands. We fought his militia because we'd rather die on our feet than live on our knees. And if that makes us criminals, if that makes us rebels, then so be it. But know that every slave you own is a potential Martha. Every quiet field hand a potential rebel. Every submissive servant someone who might burn your world down given the right push. The militia men shifted uncomfortably. Some looked disturbed by her words, confronted perhaps for the first time with the humanity of those they'd spent their lives oppressing. Others looked more determined than ever to crush this rebellion and the dangerous ideas it represented. Whitmore's face was unreadable, a mask of military discipline covering whatever he felt. "Enough speeches," the colonel finally said. "Release the hostages and surrender. That's your last chance." Martha looked back at her fellow rebels, seeing in their faces a question. Do we surrender and face torture and execution? Or do we burn with the house and deny them that satisfaction? She thought of Jonah, dead on the floor below. She thought of Rebecca and Big Moses and the dozen others who'd fallen tonight. She thought of every slave who'd ever dreamed of freedom but never lived to see it. "We got a different plan," she said, turning back to Whitmore. "We're walking out that door, all of us who can still walk. We're heading north toward the swamp. You can shoot us down if you want. We're too tired to fight back. But we're releasing the hostages first, unharmed like we promised. That way history can't say we were just murderers. History has to record that we kept our word even when white folks never kept theirs." She could see Whitmore calculating, weighing options. Let them walk and face questions about why he negotiated with slaves? Or shoot exhausted, unarmed rebels in the back and face questions about honor? The pause stretched long as eternity. Then young Samuel did something nobody expected. The boy walked forward, moving past Martha to stand in the window where everyone could see his small frame. "My name is Samuel," he said in his child's voice that somehow carried across the yard. "I'm 12 years old. I helped burn these barns because Master Harlan was going to sell my uncle. I'm ready to die for that choice, but before I do, I want y'all to know that even children ain't fooled by your lies about slavery being good for us. Even children know bondage is evil." Something shifted in that moment. Maybe it was Samuel's youth. Maybe it was the sheer audacity of a child challenging armed men. Maybe it was exhaustion on all sides finally winning out over bloodlust. Whitmore lowered his rifle slightly and gave a curt nod. "Release the hostages. Then you walk, but only to the edge of the property. After that, you're fair game for the patrols and the dogs. I'm giving you that much because..." He paused, searching for words. "Because I'm curious to see if any of you make it. Because part of me, God help me, wants to know if freedom's possible for folks like you." Martha cut Master Harlan's bonds. The man stumbled to his feet, then did something unexpected. He looked directly at her scarred face and whispered, barely audible, "I'm sorry for what I did to you. I'm sorry." It wasn't enough. It could never be enough. But it was something. Acknowledgement, if not redemption. Martha said nothing, just turned away, gathering her people for the desperate flight ahead. And that's how the rebels walked out of that burning house. Not quite victorious, not quite defeated, but alive and defiant, heading into darkness with nothing but hope and each other. Sweet Jesus, what I'm about to tell you now is how hope runs on bleeding feet through darkness, how freedom flees north with death's hounds baying behind. 14 rebels walked out of that burning big house. 14 out of the 30 who'd started the night with dreams of liberation. The others lay dead in the mud, in the quarters, in the house itself, their sacrifice painting the ground crimson. But these 14, these scarred survivors, they carried forward the torch of resistance even as their own torches guttered and died. Martha led them across the property line, moving fast despite exhaustion that made every step agony. Behind them, the Harlan plantation blazed against the night sky. 4 tobacco barns reduced to ash, the big house collapsing in on itself with groans that sounded almost human. The entire enterprise that had been built on stolen labor and broken backs now returning to the earth as smoke and ruin. "Don't look back," Martha commanded as some of the younger ones paused to stare at the destruction. "We got maybe 20 minutes before Whitmore stops feeling generous and sends the dogs after us. We need distance, need to reach the swamp before dawn." They moved through tobacco fields turned to muddy ruin by yesterday's rain, then into the forest where cypress trees grew thick and Spanish moss hung like ghostly curtains. Aunt Ruth, despite her 70 years, kept pace through sheer willpower, one gnarled hand gripping young Samuel's shoulder. Isaiah carried a wounded woman named Clara on his back, ignoring the blood still seeping from his own shoulder wound. Dinah led 4 children who'd lost parents in the fighting, keeping them quiet with whispered promises of freedom ahead. The great dismal swamp lay 20 miles north, a vast wilderness of waterlogged forest, blackwater bayous, and tangled vegetation where Maroons had lived free for generations. If they could reach it, if they could find the hidden communities of escaped slaves who called that swamp home, they had a chance. But 20 miles through hostile territory, hunted by men who knew this land and dogs trained to track human scent, the odds were as grim as the night itself. They'd gone maybe 3 miles when they heard it, the baying of hounds, distant but drawing closer. Whitmore had sent the patrols after all, his moment of mercy expired or overcome by pressure from other plantation owners who couldn't tolerate the precedent of rebellious slaves escaping unpunished. "Move faster," Martha urged, though everyone was already pushing their limits. "There's a creek about half a mile ahead. We get in that water, dogs lose our scent." But young Samuel, bringing up the rear as their lookout, had bad news. "Miss Martha, we got a problem." Clara stopped breathing. "She's gone." Isaiah had known it for the last quarter mile but hadn't wanted to admit it, carrying the dead woman on his back out of loyalty and denial. He laid her gently in the underbrush, his face wet with tears. "She never even got to see freedom," he whispered. "Died running toward it but never got to touch it. She saw more freedom in her last hours than she'd seen in 20 years of bondage," Martha said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "She saw white folks afraid, saw masters bound, saw the impossible made real. That's something. That's more than most of us get." They left Clara's body for the forest to claim. No time for burial or proper mourning. The dogs were getting closer, their barking echoing through the trees like demons announcing hell's approach. The rebels splashed into the creek Martha had mentioned, moving upstream with water to their knees, then their waists, the cold shock of it reviving exhausted bodies just enough to keep going. For an hour they traveled through that creek, stumbling over submerged roots, gasping as the water reached their chests in deeper sections. The children whimpered but stayed brave, understanding without being told that noise meant death. Aunt Ruth muttered prayers to ancestors and African gods, calling on spiritual forces to confuse their pursuers, to lead the dogs astray, to grant them the miracle of survival. When they finally emerged on the far bank, the baying had grown distant. The water had worked, at least temporarily. But everyone knew the trackers would eventually pick up the scent again, knew that men on horseback could cover ground faster than exhausted fugitives on foot. The chase was far from over. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky with pale light, they reached the edge of the swamp proper. The land changed character here, solid ground giving way to waterlogged earth, trees rising from standing water, the air thick with the smell of decay and life intermingled. Somewhere in this wilderness lay sanctuary, but finding it meant navigating a labyrinth that had drowned more than one searcher. "We need a guide," Dinah said, stating the obvious. "Someone who knows the paths, who can lead us to the Maroon camps. Otherwise, we just gonna get lost and die out here." As if summoned by her words, a figure emerged from the swamp mist. An old man so dark his skin seemed to absorb light, with gray hair and thick locks and eyes that had seen beyond the veil between worlds. He carried a staff carved with symbols that Aunt Ruth recognized as conjure marks, and around his neck hung a medicine bag that smelled of roots and power. "You the ones from the Harlan burning?" he stated, rather than asked, his voice like gravel grinding. "We saw the flames from deep in the swamp, seen 'em and knew somebody finally done what needed doing." He studied their scarred, exhausted faces, lingering on Martha's acid-burned features. "You the woman, the one they marked, the one who marked them back." "We need sanctuary," Martha said simply. "We need protection and rest. We earned it with blood tonight." The old man, who later introduced himself as Solomon, a Maroon who'd lived free in the swamp for 40 years, nodded slowly. "You earned something, that's true. But what you earned is trouble that'll follow you till Judgment Day." Every slave catcher in Virginia gonna be looking for the rebels who burned Harlan's plantation. You got prices on your heads now that'll tempt even honest folks to betrayal. So you won't help us? Isaiah asked, his hand moving toward the knife at his belt, prepared to fight even in this extremity if necessary. Solomon laughed, a sound like dry leaves rustling. I didn't say that, did I? I said you earned trouble, but you also earned respect. And in the swamp, we respect those who fight. Come on then, follow close and step where I step. This swamp swallows the unwary, but it protects those who know its ways. He led them into the deeper swamp, moving with confidence through passages that seemed impassable, finding solid ground where there appeared to be only water. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter, the dogs confused by the complex scents of the wetland, the horses unable to follow where humans now walked on paths only the initiated could see. After 2 more hours of tortuous travel, they reached it. A hidden community of maybe 50 souls living on a series of raised platforms connected by rope bridges, sheltered beneath the massive cypress trees that had stood here since before slavery existed in this land. These were the Maroons, the ones who'd escaped bondage and refused recapture, who'd built lives in this wilderness that plantation owners feared to enter. As Martha and her rebels stumbled into camp, exhausted beyond measure, the Maroons gathered to witness their arrival. Some showed respect, others suspicion, all understanding that these newcomers represented both inspiration and danger, proof that resistance was possible, but also harbingers of increased patrols and attention that could threaten the Maroons' precarious freedom. An elder woman, her face marked with tribal scars that spoke of direct African heritage, approached Martha. "You burned it?" she asked simply. "You really burned a master's fortune and walked away?" Martha met her eyes, her scarred face a testament to the cost of defiance. "We burned it, and we'd burn 100 more if we could. Every plantation in Virginia should be ash. Every master should fear sleeping in his own bed. Every slave should know that resistance is possible, even if it costs everything." The elder woman smiled, revealing gaps where teeth had been lost to age and hardship. "Then you are welcome here, sister. Welcome to the great dismal swamp, where the stolen become the free, where the hunted become the hidden. Rest now. You earned it with fire and blood." And that's how Martha and her rebels found sanctuary in the heart of the swamp, becoming legends even as they became fugitives, their story spreading through the slave network like wildfire, inspiring some and terrifying others, but impossible to ignore or erase. Now listen here, folk, 'cause what I'm about to tell you is how the hunted learn to live in shadows, how fugitives transform into something new in the wilderness. The Great Dismal Swamp became Martha's new home, a kingdom of moss and water where slavery's laws held no power, where the only authority came from survival and community. But even in sanctuary, freedom came with a price: constant vigilance, perpetual readiness to flee deeper into the swamp at the first sign of slave catchers. The Maroon community that sheltered Martha's rebels had been there for decades, some families spanning 3 generations of freedom born in hiding. They'd built a whole society in the swamp, raised platforms for living, gardens of rice and vegetables on floating mats, fish traps in the dark water, and an extensive network of lookouts who could spot danger miles before it arrived. It was precarious freedom, always one betrayal away from destruction, but it was freedom nonetheless. Martha spent the first week recovering from wounds both physical and spiritual. Aunt Ruth tended her burns and cuts with swamp herbs that the Maroons had long ago learned to use. But deeper wounds, the memory of Jonah's death, of Clara dying on Isaiah's back, of the dozen others who'd fallen, those couldn't be healed with poultices and prayers. They lived in Martha's chest like hot coals, burning with survivor's guilt and unfinished rage. Young Samuel adapted quickest to swamp life, his youth making him flexible. The Maroon children taught him how to move silent through water, how to read signs that indicated solid ground versus sucking mud, how to recognize which snakes were dangerous and which were just cautious neighbors. The boy who'd been a stable hand became a swamp child, though sometimes Martha caught him staring north toward where the Underground Railroad supposedly ran. dreaming of true freedom beyond even the swamp's protection. Isaiah struggled more. His rebellious soul chafed at hiding, at running, at the knowledge that his brother Marcus remained enslaved on the Harlan plantation, or had been sold already, separated forever by the auction that Martha's rebellion had tried to prevent. "We should go back," he'd muttered during evening gatherings. "Hit another plantation, free more slaves, keep the fire burning." But the Maroon elders, wise from decades of survival, counseled patience. "Rebellion burns bright but quick," Solomon the guide told them during a council meeting. "What y'all did at Harlan's, that was a spark, but sparks need tinder to become wildfire. Right now, every master in Virginia is on high alert. Every patrol doubled. Every slave watched closer than before. You go back now, you just get caught and hanged, and your sacrifice means nothing." "So we just hide forever?" Isaiah challenged. "Just survive while others still suffer?" "You survive until conditions are right," the elder woman with tribal scars replied, her voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. "You survive, and you spread the word. Already slaves on plantations all across Virginia are hearing about Martha the burned woman, about the rebels who made masters tremble. That's power too. The power of story, of possibility, of proof that resistance can succeed even briefly." And it was true. Through the secret network that connected enslaved people across the South, messages carried by trusted servants, songs with hidden meanings, marks left at crossroads, Martha's story spread like gospel. She became legend even while living. The woman who'd been marked with acid but rose like phoenix from that burning, who'd led a successful rebellion, who'd escaped into the swamp and still lived free. Some versions made her 10 feet tall, gave her supernatural powers, claimed she could conjure fire with her bare hands. The truth was impressive enough, but legend served purposes that truth couldn't. 3 months into their swamp exile, a visitor arrived who would change everything. He came at night, guided by Maroon scouts who'd vetted him thoroughly. A free black man from the north named William, who worked with the Underground Railroad. He was educated, well-dressed, and carried letters from abolitionists who'd heard Martha's story and wanted to help. "You're famous," William told Martha as they sat on a platform under moonlight, away from curious ears. "The northern newspapers are writing about you, though they get half the details wrong. Abolitionists are using your story to argue against slavery, holding you up as proof that enslaved people will resist unto death. You've become a symbol whether you intended to or not." Martha touched her scarred face, feeling the ridges and valleys that had become her identity. "I didn't do it to be famous. I did it because I couldn't live as property anymore. Because Master Harlan burned my face and thought that would destroy me. And instead, it forged you into something that terrifies every slaveholder in America," William said. "Which is why I'm here. We want to get you north, you and any others who'll come. Get you to places where slavery's illegal, where you can speak publicly about your experiences, where your story can be weapon in the fight to end this evil institution." The offer hung in the air like smoke. True freedom, not just survival in hiding, but the ability to walk openly, to speak freely, to build a life beyond constant fear of recapture. It was tempting beyond words, but it also meant leaving behind those who couldn't make the journey, abandoning the swamp community that had sheltered them, stepping into a different kind of visibility that brought its own dangers. "I need to think on it," Martha said. "Need to pray on it. Need to ask the ancestors what they want from me." That night, she wandered deep into the swamp alone, something the Maroons had warned against but understood she needed. She found a clearing where moonlight reflected off black water, where cypress trees ancient as memory stood witness, and there she knelt in the mud and spoke to the dead. "Mama," she whispered, "you told me to remember the pain, to hold on to my fight. I done that. I burned Master Harlan's fortune, freed myself and others, made them fear us even briefly. But now I don't know what comes next. Do I go north and become voice for the voiceless? Or do I stay here, keep fighting in the shadows, maybe help more folks escape? What would you have me do?" the swamp answered in its own language. The hoot of an owl, the splash of something moving through water, the rustle of wind through Spanish moss. And in those natural sounds, Martha heard what might have been guidance, or might have been her own wisdom finally speaking clear. You are more valuable alive and visible than dead and forgotten. Your scarred face needs to become the face of resistance. Let them see what they made you into. Let them witness what they created with their cruelty. When she returned to camp at dawn, she'd made her decision. I'll go north, she told William. But not alone. I want Samuel to come. He's young enough to build a real life in freedom. And Aunt Ruth, if she's willing. And any others who can make the journey. But Isaiah stays. Isaiah looked up sharply. What? Why? Because somebody needs to keep the fire burning, Martha explained, meeting his fierce eyes with her own scarred gaze. Because the swamp needs fighters, needs someone to lead raids and help escapees and remind masters that resistance didn't die with our rebellion. You got that fire in you, brother. Use it. Keep it alive until the day comes when all of us can walk free. The parting was bittersweet, tinged with knowledge that they might never see each other again. Isaiah embraced Martha with tears streaming down his face. You tell them up north, he said. You tell them what we did, what we sacrificed. Don't let them forget us. Never, Martha promised. I'll carry your story, and Jonah's story, and the story of everyone who fell that night. I'll make sure the whole world knows what we dared, what we achieved, and what it cost. Your names will live forever, brother. That's my vow. 2 weeks later, Martha, Samuel, Aunt Ruth, and 3 others began the dangerous journey north along the Underground Railroad. Solomon guided them to the first station, a Quaker family who hid fugitives in their barn, and passed them along to the next safe house. From there, it was a series of nighttime travels and daytime hidings, always moving toward the North Star, always one step ahead of slave catchers and bounty hunters who'd pay fortunes for Martha's capture. But she made it. Against all odds, defying the system designed to keep her enslaved, Martha reached Pennsylvania and freedom. Not the conditional freedom of the swamp, not the temporary freedom of rebellion, but legal freedom recognized by law and society. And once there, she began speaking. At churches, at abolitionist meetings, anywhere people would listen, telling the story of the woman who was burned but not broken, who'd led a slave rebellion and lived to testify. Her scarred face became her greatest asset, physical proof of slavery's brutality, visual testimony that compelled action when words alone might not. And every time she spoke, she ended the same way. They thought destroying my face would destroy my spirit, but they were wrong. And every master who looks at his slaves and thinks them docile, thinks them accepting of bondage, is wrong too. We are Martha, all of us, waiting for the moment to burn it all down. And folks swear on their lives that Martha's speeches inspired the fierce ones, the resistors, the rebels who would eventually contribute to slavery's collapse. She lived to see the Civil War, lived to see emancipation, lived to old age telling her story to grandchildren born free. The scars never faded, but neither did the fire. Listen here, folk. Gather close now for the final words of this testimony, because what I'm about to tell you is how stories become eternal, how one woman's scars transform into a nation's reckoning. Years passed after that night when tobacco barns burned and slaves rose up against their masters. Years of Martha speaking in churches and meeting halls across the North, her scarred face a living indictment of slavery's cruelty. Years of the Underground Railroad running hot with escapees inspired by her example. Years of tension building between North and South like storm clouds gathering before the thunder breaks. Martha lived to see the Civil War, that great conflagration that finally brought fire to the institution that had burned her face. She was 43 years old when Fort Sumter's cannons roared, when brother turned against brother over the question of whether human beings could be property. And she knew, in her scarred heart, that every battle fought was an extension of the rebellion she'd started that night on the Harlan plantation. Young Samuel, who'd been that brave 12-year-old boy helping to burn the barns, grew into a man who enlisted in the 54th Massachusetts Infantry, one of the first black regiments to fight for the Union. Before he marched south to battle, he visited Martha in Philadelphia, where she'd made her home. "Miss Martha," he said, his voice deep now but his eyes still carrying that same fierce determination, "I'm going back to Virginia, going back to finish what we started." She embraced him, this child who'd become a warrior, and whispered in his ear, "You already finished it, Samuel. The moment you stood in that window and told them even children knew slavery was evil, that was victory. Everything since has just been the world catching up to what we already knew." Aunt Ruth passed peacefully in her sleep 2 years into the war, at the blessed age of 75. Her last words were in that African tongue she'd learned from her grandmother, prayers and blessings that carried across the veil to join the ancestors. Martha held her hand as she crossed over, grateful that the old conjure woman had lived long enough to see slavery crumbling, to know that her root work and wisdom had contributed to freedom's arrival. Isaiah, fierce, rebellious Isaiah, who'd stayed in the swamp to keep fighting, led a dozen more raids on plantations before Confederate soldiers finally cornered him in 1863. He died as he'd lived, fighting till his last breath, taking 3 enemy soldiers with him. When Martha heard the news, she wept for 3 days, but then dried her tears and went back to speaking, knowing that Isaiah would have wanted his death to fuel the fire, not extinguish it. The Harlan plantation never recovered from that night of burning. Master Thomas Harlan tried to rebuild, but the psychological wound was too deep. He'd been humiliated, shown to be vulnerable, proven that his power rested on nothing more substantial than force and fear. He drank himself to death within 5 years. His last words reportedly a whispered apology to a ghost with a scarred face who haunted his dreams. When the Emancipation Proclamation was signed in 1863, Martha stood in the crowd outside Independence Hall as it was read aloud. Tears streamed down her ruined face. Not tears of sorrow now, but of vindication, of triumph, of knowing that the fire she'd lit had finally consumed the entire rotten system. Around her, freed people sang spirituals that had once been coded messages of resistance and were now hymns of celebration. She lived to old age, Martha did. Made it to 73 before her scarred heart finally gave out. In her last years, she ran a school for freed children, teaching them to read and write, telling them the stories of the rebellion so they'd never forget the price of freedom. And always, always, she'd trace her scarred face with gnarled fingers and say, "They thought they had destroyed me with these burns, but they only made me visible. They only made me unforgettable." The night Martha died, folks swear they saw strange lights in the sky over Philadelphia, dancing flames that moved like spirits celebrating, like ancestors welcoming one of their own home. Young people who'd heard her speak carried her story forward, and their children carried it further still, until Martha the burned woman became Martha the legend, Martha the symbol, Martha the proof that resistance is never futile, even when it seems impossible. And here's the truth that needs speaking. The testimony that must be preserved. The fire didn't end with those tobacco barns. It spread to a nation, consumed a system built on stolen lives and broken families, reduced to ash the lie that some people could own others. Martha didn't live to see it all, nobody does. But she saw enough. She saw the beginning of the end, and that was sufficient. Today, if you visit where the Harlan plantation once stood, you'll find nothing but foundations and memory. The tobacco fields have returned to forest. The big house is just a footprint in the earth. But folks say that on certain nights when the moon is right and the wind carries whispers from the past, you can still smell smoke, still hear the crackling of flames, still catch glimpses of a tall woman with a scarred face standing proud among the ruins, a living reminder that you can burn a person's flesh but never their spirit, never their determination, never their capacity for resistance. This story I done told you. It's more than history. It's warning and promise both. Warning to those who would oppress. We are all Martha, waiting for our moment. And promise to those who suffer. Resistance is possible, victory is achievable, and freedom, once tasted, can never be forgotten. The fire Martha lit still burns in the hearts of the oppressed, in the spirits of those who refuse to accept injustice, in the souls of everyone who's ever looked at chains and said, "No more." That fire is eternal, passed from generation to generation like a sacred flame that no amount of water or cruelty can extinguish. So remember this tale, children. Remember Martha. Remember Jonah. Remember Isaiah and Aunt Ruth and young Samuel and all the countless souls who fought and died and survived and testified. Remember that tobacco barns can burn, that masters can fall, that the impossible becomes possible when people decide they'd rather die free than live in bondage. And when you face your own injustices, your own battles, your own moments of choosing between submission and resistance, remember that you carry Martha's fire in your chest, that the ancestors walk beside you, that every act of defiance, no matter how small, contributes to the eventual liberation of us all. The ones who fell are not forgotten. The ones who fought still walk among us in spirit. Their voices echo through time, carried on the wind, preserved in memory, living forever in the hearts of those who refused to bow. Those who suffered, suffered. Those who resisted left memory behind. And memory is kept here, in the files of slavery.